just a housewife who can't understand business. My husband's mockery echoed through the penthouse suite as hospitality executives shifted uncomfortably. 10 minutes later, his face went pale when the board announced their new CEO, me. He'd been reporting to his wife for 3 years without knowing it. "Gentlemen, my wife Brooke here is the perfect example of knowing your place," Ian said, swirling his bourbon in a crystal tumbler. "She's mastered the art of being just a housewife." I maintained my practiced smile, smoothing the napkin across my lap as if it were the most important task in the world. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Around us, the private dining room of the Summit Hotel vibrated with nervous energy. The city's hospitality elite surrounded our table. Hotel magnates, tourism board directors, and most crucially, the entire executive board of Pinnacle Resorts. If Ian knew, they reported to me, not him. "Tell them, darling," Ian continued. Ice. Cubes clinking against crystal as he nursed his 4th bourbon of the night. "Tell them about that time you thought about getting your business degree." He turned to Reed Wilson, Pinnacle's operations director, whom I'd had breakfast with just yesterday to discuss our Asian expansion. Can you imagine? I had to explain to her that hospitality management isn't for everyone. Some people are just meant to support from the sidelines. I caught Alex Moretti's eye across the table's elaborate orchid centerpiece. As Pinnacle's chief strategy officer, she'd been instrumental in our last property acquisition. Her slight frown was nearly imperceptible, but I recognized it. The same expression she wore when we negotiated particularly complex deals. Not that my husband knew anything about those meetings. "Ian," Alex interrupted smoothly, "I'm actually quite interested in Brooke's perspective on—" "Oh, Alex." Ian waved his hand dismissively. "Brooke's perspective is best saved for planning our dinner parties and managing our social calendar. Right, honey?" His fingers dug into my shoulder with what others might mistake for affection, but I felt the possessive pressure behind it. The server appeared with another round of drinks, and I watched as he placed a fresh bourbon in front of my husband. Ian's hand trembled slightly as he reached for it, a tell I'd learned to recognize years ago. 5 years of marriage had taught me to read the signs of his impending social spiral. "You know what makes a successful man?" Ian's voice grew louder, words slightly slurred. "Having a wife who knows her role. Brooke here has perfected it. No ambitions beyond our home, no silly career dreams competing with mine. Just a housewife, and that's exactly what I need." 8 years before that fateful dinner, I stood in the lobby of the Paragon Hotel in San Francisco, surveying what would become my first acquisition. At 28, I had already made a name for myself in hospitality management, though I used my maiden name, Brooke Morgan, professionally. My grandfather had left me a small boutique hotel when I was 23, and I'd turned it into a destination spot within 3 years. "Ms. Morgan, the renovation estimates," my assistant said, handing me a folder. "Thank you, Piper," I replied, skimming the figures. It would take significant capital to transform the Paragon, but I had a vision for what it could become. The cornerstone of what would eventually be Morgan Hospitality Group. "The investors are waiting in the Cypress Room," Piper reminded me. I nodded, straightening my blazer. At 28, I was often the youngest person in the room during these meetings, and frequently the only woman. I'd learned to command respect through preparation and unwavering confidence. "Good afternoon," I said, entering the meeting room where 5 men in expensive suits sat waiting. "Thank you for coming. Let's talk about how we're going to revolutionize luxury hospitality on the West Coast." 2 hours later, I walked out with full financial backing for my expansion plan. Within 6 months, the Paragon reopened to rave reviews and record bookings. At 29, I was featured in Hospitality Today as the prodigy hotelier changing the luxury market. By 30, I had acquired 2 more properties and was scouting locations internationally. When I met Ian Caldwell at a tourism industry conference in New York, I was 31 and in the midst of a major East Coast expansion. I was speaking on a panel about sustainability in luxury accommodations when I noticed him in the audience. Tall, conventionally handsome, with the self-assured demeanor of someone used to being the most important person in the room. Interesting points about LEED certification not being enough for true sustainability, he said, approaching me after the panel. Though I think you're overestimating guests' willingness to sacrifice certain luxuries for environmental benefits. I'm not asking guests to sacrifice anything, I replied. I'm creating an experience where sustainability enhances luxury rather than competing with it. He smiled, extending his hand. Ian Caldwell, Caldwell Hospitality Management. I recognized the name. Caldwell was a mid-sized player in traditional luxury hospitality, solid properties but nothing innovative. Brooke, I said, shaking his hand but deliberately omitting my last name. Something about his confident dismissal of my business model made me hesitate to reveal my full identity. It was a split-second decision that would shape the next 8 years of my life. Just Brooke? He asked, raising an eyebrow. For now, I smiled. Well, just Brooke. Would you join me for dinner? I'd love to hear more about your unique approach to hospitality. The condescension was subtle but unmistakable. He saw me as a novelty, not a colleague. Normally, I would have declined, but something about the challenge intrigued me. Here was someone representing the old guard of hospitality, someone who might benefit from a broader perspective. I'd be delighted, I said. Our first date was at Le Bernardin, where Ian spent the first 20 minutes explaining the basics of restaurant operations to me, apparently assuming I had no knowledge of the industry. When the conversation finally turned to my background, I simply said I worked in hospitality administration. Oh, so you're in HR? Or perhaps event coordination? He asked. I could have corrected him. Should have, perhaps. But his automatic assumption that I couldn't possibly be in operations or development revealed something about his character that gave me pause. Something like that, I replied vaguely. His face relaxed slightly, and he launched into a detailed explanation of his latest hotel acquisition. I listened, fascinated not by the details, which were frankly uninspired, but by his complete confidence in his own expertise and his inability to consider that I might have relevant experience. The problem with the industry today, he declared, is too many people trying to reinvent what isn't broken. Luxury hospitality is about tradition, about giving guests what they expect. But isn't innovation necessary for growth? I countered. Guest expectations evolve. Innovation within established parameters, he clarified. You can't just throw out the playbook because some trend report suggests millennials want meditation, rooms instead of minibars. I smiled, thinking of the award-winning mindfulness suites I had recently launched at my Santa Barbara property, complete with reimagined minibars offering locally sourced, sustainable refreshments. Despite our differing views, the conversation was engaging. Ian was intelligent, if narrow in his thinking, and clearly passionate about hospitality. There was something almost refreshing about his straightforward approach after years of navigating complex investor relationships and board politics. Our relationship progressed quickly. Within 6 months, we were seeing each other regularly. I maintained my separate professional identity, a task made easier by my travel schedule and Ian's lack of curiosity about my work life. When I was with him in New York, I was simply Brooke, the girlfriend who worked in hotel administration. When I was in San Francisco, Tokyo, London, or any of the other cities where Morgan Hospitality was expanding, I was Brooke Morgan, CEO. The dual identity wasn't planned. It evolved naturally from that first omission and Ian's assumptions. The longer it continued, the harder it became to correct. You should quit that administrative job, Ian suggested one night, about 9 months into our relationship. Caldwell is expanding, and I could use someone to manage our social calendar, coordinate with charity partners, that sort of thing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I like my independence, I replied carefully. Of course you do, he said, kissing my forehead in a way that felt oddly patronizing. But wouldn't it be nice to work together? To be part of? Building something significant? The irony wasn't lost on me. By that point, Morgan Hospitality was valued at over $300 million, with 12 properties internationally. I'd just closed a deal to develop a groundbreaking eco-luxury resort in Costa Rica. Meanwhile, Ian's company was struggling to keep pace, with industry changes, clinging to an outdated business model that prioritized opulence over experience. I should have told him then. In retrospect, that moment, his casual suggestion that I abandon my career to support his, was the crossroads. But something held me back. Part curiosity, part experiment, part a growing concern about how he would react to learning the truth. Let me think about it, I said instead. 2 weeks later, Ian proposed during a weekend in Paris. The ring was extravagant, exactly what one would expect from a traditional luxury hotelier. Maximum impressiveness with minimal imagination. You make me better, Brooke, he said as he slipped it onto my finger. You're everything I want in a partner. Supportive, understanding, not caught up in trying to compete with my career. Again, the moment to reveal my true identity presented itself. Again, I let it pass. By then, I had begun to understand something about Ian and men like him. His confidence was built on certain fundamental assumptions about his place in the world, about the natural order of things. Disrupting those assumptions wouldn't just surprise him, it would shatter his entire worldview. And so I said yes, knowing I was committing to a complex deception, but telling myself it was temporary, that I would find the right moment to integrate my two lives. That moment never came. Instead, as we planned our wedding, I made a series of decisions that would cement our separate realities. First, I maintained my maiden name professionally, which wasn't unusual in business. Second, I established a small office in New York that I referred to as my charity foundation, a cover for the times I needed to work locally. Third, I carefully compartmentalized our social circles, ensuring that my business associates understood my need for discretion regarding my personal life. By the time we married at the Plaza, a wedding I largely planned around my acquisition, schedule for a property in Dubai, I had created 2 entirely separate lives. Brooke Caldwell, devoted wife who managed household affairs and charity events, and Brooke Morgan, CEO of a rapidly expanding international hotel chain whose innovative approach to luxury hospitality was disrupting the entire industry. The wedding itself was a masterclass in compartmentalization. My side of the guest list required careful curation, family members who knew to maintain my cover, a few close friends from college, and business associates who could be trusted to play along with the narrative that I worked in hospitality, administration. You've done well for yourself, landing Caldwell, one of Ian's colleagues commented during the reception. He's going places in this industry. If only he knew that the woman he was addressing had just been named Hotelier of the Year by Hospitality Global and was in the midst of the largest luxury hotel expansion in the Pacific Rim. I'm very lucky, I replied with a practiced smile. As we exchanged vows, I wondered how long I could maintain this division. How long before the growing success of Morgan Hospitality inevitably collided with my married life? But each time I considered coming clean to Ian, something would happen to reinforce my hesitation. Like the night of our honeymoon, when a business magazine featured both of us in separate articles. Ian's was a brief mention in a piece about traditional luxury hoteliers. Mine was a cover story about disruptors in the industry. Ian tossed the magazine aside without reading past his mention. Business publications, he scoffed. Always chasing the next trend instead of recognizing what actually works. I watched him dismiss my greatest professional achievement without even realizing it, and something shifted inside me. This wasn't just about avoiding an awkward conversation anymore. I was beginning to understand that there was something valuable in this unusual experiment, a unique perspective on gender, power, and perception in business that few would ever experience. And so, as we returned from our honeymoon to begin our married life, I made a conscious decision to maintain my dual identity, not forever, but for long enough to fully understand its implications. It was a decision that would ultimately lead us to that fateful dinner 5 years later, where Ian's public mockery of his just a housewife would set in motion the collapse of everything he had built and believed about himself. The first year of marriage was a masterclass in compartmentalization. I maintained 2 separate phones, 2 separate email accounts, 2 separate wardrobes, even 2 separate speaking styles. As Brooke Caldwell, I adopted a softer tone, more tentative body, language, and carefully curated conversation topics that wouldn't reveal my business acumen. As Brooke Morgan, I spoke with the direct authority of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms. Our Manhattan penthouse became the stage where I performed my role as just a housewife, while my real office 20 blocks away served as the command center for Morgan Hospitality's expanding empire. "Darling, I'll be at the foundation most of the day," I told Ian one morning, 3 months into our marriage. "We're organizing that charity gala for children's education." "That's nice," he replied absently, scrolling through his phone. "I've got meetings with potential investors all day. Try not to schedule any dinner parties this week. I need to focus on this Dubai proposal." I suppressed a smile, knowing that I had finalized my own Dubai property acquisition the previous day, a deal that had made headlines in the hospitality industry, but that Ian, in his carefully cultivated bubble, had somehow missed. "Of course, dear. Good luck with your proposal." At my actual office, the morning began with a senior leadership meeting about our expansion into Southeast Asia. "The Singapore property is exceeding projected occupancy by 12%, Alex Moretti reported. "The sustainability initiatives are proving to be a major draw for luxury travelers, especially from Europe and Australia." "Excellent," I replied, reviewing the figures. "And how are we progressing with the Bangkok acquisition?" "We're facing some competition," Alex admitted. "Caldwell Hospitality has submitted a competing bid." I looked up sharply. This was the first direct business conflict between my company and Ian's. "What's their angle?" "Traditional luxury, emphasis on opulence and name recognition. Their bid is actually lower than ours, but they're leveraging their relationship with the Siam Royal Group." I considered this information carefully. I could easily outbid Ian's company. Morgan Hospitality had more capital and better financing terms. But doing so would raise questions, potentially drawing attention to connections between our companies that I wasn't ready to explain. "Let's approach this strategically," I decided. "Instead of simply outbidding them, let's offer something they can't. A partnership model with the local community, extensive sustainability commitments, and a profit-sharing arrangement with local businesses. Make it about more than just money." 2 weeks later, Morgan Hospitality won the Bangkok property rights. When Ian came home frustrated about losing the deal, I prepared his favorite meal and listened sympathetically as he complained about newcomers with more funding than sense. "These upstarts like Morgan Hospitality don't understand the foundations of luxury," he fumed. "They think putting bamboo straws in the bar and solar panels on the roof somehow justifies charging premium rates. Maybe guests are looking for something different these days," I suggested carefully. He dismissed this with a wave. "Trends come and go. Traditional luxury endures. Morgan will overextend and collapse within 5 years, mark my words." I nodded and refilled his wine glass, fighting back the urge to point out that Morgan Hospitality's profit margins were nearly double those of his company, or that our guest satisfaction scores consistently outranked traditional luxury chains. These conversations became a regular feature of our marriage, Ian dismissing industry innovations that threatened his business model, while I nodded sympathetically, all the while pioneering those very innovations. It created a strange intimacy. I understood my husband's business vulnerabilities better than anyone, knew exactly which market shifts kept him awake at night, and watched in real time as he failed to adapt to changes I was helping drive. There were close calls, of course. Like the time Ian's assistant booked him at one of my London properties without realizing the connection. "The new Morgan Hotel in Mayfair is impressive," he admitted grudgingly upon his return. Though all that talk about authentic experiences and mindful luxury feels like marketing babble. "What did you like about it?" I asked, curious to hear his unfiltered opinion of my work. "The details were impeccable," he conceded, "and the staff seemed genuinely engaged, not just going through the motions. I actually tried to poach their concierge manager, but apparently, employee loyalty is absurdly high there." I smiled, remembering how I'd personally developed the employment model at that property, emphasizing fair wages, growth opportunities, and genuine empowerment. Perhaps they're doing something right with their company culture. Perhaps, he allowed before quickly changing the subject. But that doesn't change the fundamentals of the business. Flash and novelty can only take you so far. As our second year of marriage progressed, maintaining my dual identity became increasingly complex. Morgan Hospitality was growing at an unprecedented rate, expanding into new markets across Europe and Asia. I was being featured in business publications with increasing frequency, necessitating careful media management to keep my professional profile separate from my personal life. Isaac, my executive assistant, became critical to maintaining this division. He masterfully scheduled my life to prevent overlaps, ensured photographs were carefully controlled, and maintained the fiction of my charity foundation whenever necessary. "Ms. Morgan," he said one afternoon, entering my office with concern, "we have a situation. Your husband's company has just announced they're bidding on the Pinnacle Resorts management contract. That's directly competitive with our proposal." Pinnacle Resorts was a collection of premium properties that would be transformative for whichever company secured the management rights. I had been personally courting their board for months, and we were close to finalizing terms. "This complicates things," I acknowledged. "Who's heading their bid process?" "Reed Wilson is leading the evaluation team for Pinnacle." I nodded thoughtfully. Reed was a progressive thinker in the industry, someone who understood the direction luxury hospitality was heading. "Arrange a dinner with Reed. Private room, explicit confidentiality." That evening, as I dressed for my secret meeting with Reed Wilson, Ian called to say he'd be working late. "Preparing for a major pitch," he explained. "This could be transformative for Caldwell Hospitality." "The Pinnacle contract?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "How did you—" he began, then laughed. "I must have mentioned it. Yes, it's Pinnacle. Their traditional approach aligns perfectly with our brand. It's practically a done deal." After hanging up, I completed my transformation from Brooke Caldwell to Brooke Morgan, changing from casual elegance to power dressing, styling my hair differently, even adjusting my posture and speaking cadence. The woman who strode into the private dining room at 11 Madison Park that evening bore little resemblance to the supportive wife who had wished her husband luck on his pitch. "Reed," I greeted the Pinnacle executive with a firm handshake. "Thank you for making time on short notice." "Brooke," he replied warmly. "Always a pleasure. Though I must admit, I'm curious about the request for heightened confidentiality." Over dinner, I outlined Morgan Hospitality's vision for Pinnacle's properties, sustainability innovations that would reduce operating costs by 30%, guest experience, enhancements that would justify premium pricing, and community integration models that would transform each property into a destination rather than merely accommodation. "This is compelling," Reed admitted, "but I should be transparent. We're also considering Caldwell Hospitality. Their proposal is more traditional, but they have a strong track record." I took a calculated risk. Reed, what I'm about to share requires absolute discretion. There's a personal complication in this competitive situation. He raised an eyebrow, but nodded. Ian Caldwell is my husband, I said quietly. We maintain separate professional identities for personal reasons, and he is unaware of my position at Morgan Hospitality. Reed's expression shifted from surprise to fascination. That's unusual. It wasn't planned, I explained. When we met, he made assumptions about my role in the industry. By the time things became serious, correcting those assumptions became increasingly complicated. And now you're directly competing for the same contract, Reed observed. What exactly are you asking of me? Nothing improper, I assured him. Judge both proposals on their merits alone. But I need your discretion regarding my identity, regardless of your decision. Reed studied me thoughtfully. You realize this puts me in an awkward position? I do. And if you feel it's inappropriate, I understand. Morgan can withdraw our proposal. That won't be necessary, he said after a moment. Your personal situation doesn't change the quality of your proposal. But I am curious. How do you manage this double life? It was a question I'd been asking myself with increasing frequency. The separate phones and email accounts were the easy part. The harder aspects were psychological, compartmentalizing my knowledge, tempering my expertise in conversations with Ian, watching him struggle with business challenges I could easily solve. Carefully, I replied, and not without cost. 3 weeks later, Pinnacle Resorts announced they were awarding their management contract to Morgan Hospitality. The press release cited our innovative approach to luxury, commitment to sustainability, and superior financial projections as deciding factors. Ian was devastated. He came home that evening with a bottle of scotch, pouring himself a generous glass before even removing his tie. We lost Pinnacle, he said flatly. I'm so sorry, I replied, and meant it. Despite the business victory, seeing my husband's defeat brought no pleasure. It doesn't make sense, he continued, loosening his tie, with frustrated movements. Our proposal was solid, traditional, proven, and they went with Morgan, a company run by some woman who thinks putting beehives on hotel roofs is revolutionary. I stiffened slightly at some woman, but kept my expression sympathetic. Perhaps they were looking for something different? Different doesn't mean better, he snapped, then immediately softened. I'm sorry, I shouldn't take this out on you. You wouldn't understand the complexities anyway. This moment, his automatic assumption that I couldn't comprehend the business implications, coming immediately after losing to my company, crystallized the strange duality of my existence. I had just orchestrated one of the most significant deals in luxury hospitality that year, and my husband was gently explaining to me that such matters were beyond my comprehension. It's all right, I said, refilling his glass. Tell me what happened. As he outlined Pinnacle's decision, highlighting all the reasons he believed Morgan Hospitality was making a mistake, I listened with the unique perspective of someone who existed in both worlds simultaneously, the architect of his defeat and the supportive wife helping him process it. That night marked a turning point in our marriage and in my relationship with my dual identity. As Ian slept beside me, exhausted from disappointment and scotch, I stared at the ceiling, contemplating the unsustainable nature of my situation. The Pinnacle deal had brought our companies into direct competition. It wouldn't be the last time. Part of me considered coming clean then, showing Ian the press release with my name clearly listed as CEO, explaining the years of separate existence, asking for understanding. But another part recognized that his reaction to losing the contract, his dismissive comments about some woman, and his assumption that I couldn't grasp business concepts, revealed a fundamental truth about how he saw the world and my place in it. The next morning, as we shared breakfast, Ian had regrouped and found his confidence. It's a setback, not a failure, he declared, straightening his tie. Pinnacle will regret their decision when Morgan's inexperience shows. We'll be there to pick up the pieces. I'm sure you will, I replied, pouring his coffee exactly the way he liked it. I've got a strategy session all day, he continued. Wait up. We'll be working late to recalibrate after yesterday's news. I understand. I'll be at the foundation anyway. We're finalizing the summer gala plans. He kissed me absently on the forehead before leaving, his mind already focused on recovery strategies. As the door closed behind him, I allowed my posture to change, straightening from the slightly deferential pose I adopted around Ian to the confident stance of a CEO. 20 minutes later, I entered my actual office, where the atmosphere was celebratory. The Pinnacle acquisition had made headlines across the industry, and our stock had jumped 8% overnight. Congratulations, Ms. Morgan, Isaac greeted me, handing me a coffee. Prepared exactly as I liked it, not as Ian preferred. The executive team is gathered for the Pinnacle integration planning session. Thank you, Isaac, I replied, taking the coffee and my real identity back with equal gratitude. Let's make sure this transition is flawless. I want Pinnacle to know they made the right choice. As I walked into the boardroom where my senior leadership team awaited, Alex Moretti was the first to offer congratulations. The Pinnacle deal is transformative, she said. Though I admit, I'm curious how things are at home, given the circumstances. Alex was one of the few people who knew about my marital situation. As my closest advisor and friend, she had expressed concerns about the sustainability of my dual life. Complicated, I admitted quietly, but manageable for now. For now, she echoed, raising an eyebrow. Brooke, you're leading one of the fastest-growing hospitality companies in the world. For now has an expiration date. She was right, of course. The larger Morgan Hospitality grew, the more visible I became, and the more difficult it would be to maintain my separate identities. The Pinnacle acquisition had dramatically raised our profile, putting us in direct competition with Caldwell Hospitality in multiple markets. Something would have to give. I just didn't know yet what that would be, or when the breaking point would come. What I didn't anticipate was that the breaking point would arrive at a dinner 3 years later, when my husband would publicly mock my capabilities in front of the very executives who reported to me, setting in motion the collapse of everything he thought he knew about his wife, his business, and his place in the world. The morning routine in the Caldwell household followed a carefully choreographed script. Ian woke at 6:30, showered, and emerged to find coffee brewing and breakfast prepared. I was always dressed in casual elegance, designer, loungewear that suggested I had nowhere important to be, but still maintained the aesthetic expected of a successful executive's wife. What's on your schedule today? Ian would ask, scanning financial news on his tablet. Foundation work this morning, I would reply, pouring his coffee. Then lunch with Melanie. Melanie was the wife of one of Ian's colleagues, a former marketing executive who had given up her career when her husband made partner. Ian approved of our friendship. Will you be home for dinner? I would ask. Unlikely. Meeting with the Tokyo investors. Don't wait up. He would kiss me absently on the cheek, his mind already at the office. Once he left, I would transform. The casual loungewear would be replaced by a power suit. The soft, deferential posture would straighten into the confident stance of someone accustomed to authority. Even my voice would change, dropping to a lower register, speaking with more precision and command. This was the true choreography of our marriage, a constant dance between presence and absence, revelation and concealment. The spaces between us were filled with half-truths and strategic omissions that maintained the illusion of the life Ian believed we shared. Our penthouse apartment itself reflected this duality. The main living spaces were decorated to Ian's taste, traditional luxury, with antique furniture and classic art. But my home office, which Ian rarely entered, contained subtle elements of my true aesthetic, innovative design pieces, contemporary, art and books on sustainable business practices and hospitality innovation that Ian would have found puzzling in Just a Housewife. "Your wife has excellent taste," his colleagues would comment when they visited for dinner parties. "She's created such a beautiful home." "Brooke knows what I like," Ian would reply with possessive pride, never noticing that the floral arrangements featured the same signature style as those in Morgan hospitality properties, or that the table settings quietly incorporated sustainable materials identical to those being pioneered in my hotels. The dinner parties themselves were masterclasses in strategic hospitality. While Ian believed I was simply playing the role of gracious hostess, I was often using these gatherings to research competitors, identify potential partnerships, or solve staffing challenges. "Charles, I heard your daughter just graduated from Cornell's hospitality program," I would say casually to a rival hotelier. "What are her plans?" "Looking for opportunities in hotel management," Charles would reply. "The market's tight right now. Perhaps I could introduce her to some people." "At my foundation," I would offer. "We have connections in the industry." 2 weeks later, Charles's daughter would be hired by Morgan Hospitality, with no knowledge that the CEO who approved her hiring was the same woman who had served her father roast duck in a Manhattan penthouse. These small infiltrations, placing my staff in strategic positions, gathering intelligence during social events, leveraging connections without revealing their true purpose, became second nature. The very skills that made me an effective CEO made me an exceptional housewife in Ian's eyes. But maintaining this division exacted a toll. There were moments, increasingly frequent as the years passed, when the performance became exhausting. Like the night Ian came home frustrated after losing another contract to Morgan Hospitality. "I don't understand it," he fumed, pouring himself a bourbon. "We offered better terms, more competitive rates. The client said they preferred Morgan's progressive approach and authentic guest experience. What does that even mean? It's hospitality, not philosophy." I listened, nodding sympathetically, while mentally reviewing the presentation I had personally delivered to that same client the previous day. A comprehensive vision for transforming their properties into industry-leading examples of experience-driven luxury. "Maybe they're responding to something new," I suggested. "New isn't always better," he replied dismissively. "You wouldn't understand, darling. Business decisions should be based on fundamentals, not trends." These moments, when Ian casually dismissed my understanding of the very industry I was helping reshape, created a peculiar kind of cognitive dissonance. Part of me wanted to challenge him to reveal that not only did I understand his business, I was actively outperforming him in it. Another part recognized the unique perspective this situation afforded me, insight into how capable women were routinely underestimated in business settings. Our third anniversary celebration illustrated this dynamic perfectly. Ian booked a private dining room at Le Bernardin, where we'd had our first date, and invited several business associates and their wives. "A toast," one of his colleagues offered, raising a glass. "To Ian and his perfect wife, behind every successful man." "Is a woman who knows her place?" Ian finished with a laugh that others around the table echoed uncomfortably. I smiled and raised my glass, mentally calculating how Morgan Hospitality's market capitalization now exceeded Caldwell's by a factor of 3. The successful man at our table wasn't who everyone assumed. Later that evening, as we returned home, Ian was in high spirits, buoyed by wine and the admiration of his peers. "Did you see how impressed James was with the Tokyo deal?" he asked, loosening his tie as we entered our penthouse. "He thought we'd never get Japanese investors to commit." "I'm proud of you," I said, and meant it despite the complications. Ian was hardworking and dedicated, even if his business approach was outdated. In another universe, one where he could see women as equals, he might have been an excellent partner in both life and business. "You know what James said to me in the Restroom? Ian continued, pouring himself a nightcap. You've got it all, Caldwell. The business, the home, the perfect wife. He raised his glass toward me. He's right about that last part, at least. I smiled, slipping off my heels. Only the last part? He laughed. Well, the business has its challenges. That Morgan outfit keeps undercutting us on innovation. But the home and wife part, that's all working perfectly. That night, lying awake beside my sleeping husband, I contemplated the strange intersection of intimacy and deception that defined our marriage. Ian knew my favorite foods, my childhood stories, my physical responses, yet had no idea who I truly was professionally. I understood his business anxieties, his competitive strategies, his market vulnerabilities, yet played a role that prevented me from ever honestly discussing them with him. It was a peculiar form of loneliness, being so deeply known and so fundamentally misunderstood simultaneously. The fourth year of our marriage brought new pressures as Morgan Hospitality's growth accelerated. We acquired a significant property portfolio in Europe, launched an innovative eco-luxury brand that received global attention, and were featured in a major business magazine as redefining the future of hospitality. Maintaining my anonymity became increasingly difficult. I began declining television interviews, restricted my public appearances, and ensured that publicity photos were carefully controlled. The few times my image did appear in business publications, I made subtle adjustments to my appearance. Different hairstyle, distinctive glasses, more dramatic makeup that created just enough distance from my housewife persona to prevent casual recognition. At home, the performance continued. I maintained the fiction of my foundation work, hosted Ian's business associates for strategic dinners, and played the role of supportive wife while he complained about competitors who were ruining the industry with their misguided innovations. The strain began showing in small ways. I became quieter at his business dinners, finding it harder to nod and smile as he dismissed ideas I had pioneered. I grew more distant when he patronizingly explained industry concepts I had literally written white papers about. I found myself working later at my real office, making excuses about foundation events to avoid the cognitive dissonance of my dual existence. Ian noticed these changes but misinterpreted them entirely. You seem distracted lately, he observed, one evening as I absent-mindedly pushed food around my plate, mentally reviewing a complex acquisition strategy I'd been developing all day. Just tired, I replied. The foundation gala is coming up. He reached across the table to pat my hand. You shouldn't stress so much about these charity events, darling. They're supposed to be fun, not exhausting. It's a lot of coordination, I said vaguely. Here's a thought, he offered, clearly pleased with his sudden inspiration. Why not step back from the foundation work? You don't actually need to work, you know. I make more than enough for both of us. I looked up sharply. I like having my own purpose. Of course you do, he said soothingly. But there are other ways to find fulfillment. We could start thinking about a family, or you could focus on redecorating the Hamptons house. This conversation, his casual suggestion that I abandon my professional identity, not realizing he was asking the CEO of a billion-dollar company to consider redecorating as an alternative, marked another pivotal moment. I realized then that Ian didn't just underestimate me. He fundamentally couldn't conceive of me as a professional equal. I'm not ready to give up my work, I said carefully. He shrugged, already moving on. Just a thought, no rush, though I do think you'd make an excellent mother. The subject was dropped, but the underlying assumption remained that my work was a hobby, an optional activity to fill time until more important responsibilities came along. It was around this time that Alex Moretti, my chief strategy officer and closest confidant, raised concerns during one of our private lunches away from the office. This double life isn't sustainable, Brooke, she said bluntly. The company is too visible now. You're too important to the brand. And frankly, it can't be healthy to live like this. I sipped my wine, considering her words. It's complicated. It's more than complicated, she pressed. You're living a lie with someone who's supposed to be your partner. How can he be your partner when he doesn't even know who you are? He knows who I am, I defended weakly. Just not what I do. Alex raised an eyebrow. In our industry, what we do is a huge part of who we are. You're hiding your passion, your talent, your achievements, all the things that make you who you are professionally. That's not a small omission. What would you have me do? I asked. Tell him now, after 5 years of marriage? Surprise, honey. I'm actually the CEO of your biggest competitor, the company that's been consistently outperforming yours in the market. Yes, she said simply. Exactly that. It will be difficult, but continuing this charade is worse. I knew. She was right, at least in theory, but the practical reality was more complex. By this point, revealing my identity wouldn't just mean disclosing a secret. It would mean admitting to years of deception, potentially undermining our entire relationship, and certainly shattering Ian's ego and worldview. I'll find the right moment, I promised. Make sure you do, Alex warned, because if you don't choose the moment, eventually it will choose itself. Her words proved prophetic, though not in the way either of us anticipated. As our 5th anniversary approached, Ian suggested we celebrate with a dinner at the Summit, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, located on the top floor, of what had recently become a Morgan Hospitality property, though Ian didn't know that connection. I've invited some key business associates, he informed me. The Pinnacle executive team will be there. It's a celebration, but also a chance to strengthen those relationships. The Pinnacle executives, including Reed Wilson and Suzanne Reynolds, all reported to me, a fact Ian remained oblivious to despite their contract with Morgan Hospitality being public knowledge. His persistent blindness to my professional identity had become almost impressive in its completeness. Of course, I agreed. I'll plan accordingly. What I didn't tell Ian was that earlier that same day, my executive team and I would be finalizing the details of our largest move yet, the acquisition of Caldwell Hospitality Management. After years of competing as separate entities, Morgan Hospitality had quietly been purchasing shares of Ian's company through subsidiary holdings. We now had enough stakeholder support to force a board vote on complete acquisition. The timing wasn't intentionally aligned with our anniversary. Business operations followed their own schedule, but the coincidence created a perfect storm of revelation and reckoning. As I stood in our bedroom, preparing for the anniversary, dinner that would change everything, I studied my reflection in the mirror. For this evening, I was still Brooke Caldwell, supportive wife. Tomorrow, the world, including my husband, would know me as Brooke Morgan, CEO. The weight of imminent revelation felt strangely liberating. After 5 years of careful performance, I was exhausted. Whatever happened at dinner tonight, whatever came tomorrow when the acquisition was announced, at least the burden of deception would finally be lifted. Ready, darling? Ian called from the living room. The car is waiting. I took one last look in the mirror, straightened my shoulders, and prepared for the final act of my longest-running performance. Coming, I replied, stepping into the hall where my husband waited, blissfully unaware that in less than 24 hours, everything he thought he knew about his wife, his business, and his place in the world would be irrevocably transformed. While my marriage followed its carefully scripted routine, Morgan Hospitality was experiencing explosive growth. What had begun as a single boutique hotel in San Francisco had transformed into a global hospitality empire with over 40 properties across 5 continents. The morning of our 5th anniversary began like many others, in my real office, 20 floors above Manhattan, reviewing quarterly projections with my executive team. The Asian market has exceeded expectations by 22%, Piper reported. highlighting figures on the presentation screen. Our Tokyo property is now the highest-rated luxury hotel in the city, and the Singapore location has been featured in 3 major travel publications this quarter. I nodded, scanning the detailed metrics. And the sustainability initiatives? Transformative, Alex confirmed. Energy costs across all properties are down 18% year-over-year, and guest satisfaction scores for our eco-luxury amenities are averaging 9.4 out of 10. We're setting industry standards. The contrast between these morning strategy sessions and the conversations I had with Ian about business couldn't have been starker. Here, surrounded by my executive team, ideas flowed freely, innovations were celebrated, and my expertise was not just acknowledged, but sought after. The psychological whiplash of transitioning between these environments had grown more pronounced with each passing year. Let's discuss the Caldwell acquisition, I said, turning to the most sensitive item on our agenda. Where do we stand? Reed Wilson, who had joined Morgan Hospitality after the Pinnacle merger, brought up the relevant documentation on screen. We've secured commitments from 58% of shareholders. The board vote is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. All projections indicate approval. I studied the figures carefully. This acquisition had been planned meticulously over the past year, as Caldwell Hospitality's market position weakened due to their failure to adapt to changing consumer preferences. Their traditional luxury model, once the gold standard, had become increasingly obsolete as travelers sought experiences that combined opulence with meaning, sustainability, and authentic local connection, precisely what Morgan Hospitality offered. And the integration plan? I asked. Comprehensive, Suzanne Reynolds replied. We've identified key personnel to retain, properties that align with our portfolio, and those that would benefit from rebranding or renovation. We can absorb their operations with minimal disruption. What remained unspoken in the room was the personal complication that the CEO of the company we were acquiring was my husband, who remained completely unaware of my role at Morgan Hospitality. Everyone on my executive team now knew about my unusual marital situation, a necessity as the acquisition plans advanced. The timing is delicate, I acknowledged, addressing the elephant in the room. Ian and I have our anniversary dinner tonight, at the summit. He's invited several of you. I glanced at Reed and Suzanne. The acquisition announcement will come tomorrow morning, which means tonight will be complicated. Are you going to tell him beforehand? Alex asked the question. Everyone was thinking. I had considered this option carefully. A private revelation, in the controlled environment of our home, might be kinder than allowing Ian to learn about my identity alongside the rest of the business world. But each time I contemplated this scenario, I couldn't envision a path where it ended well. No, I decided. There's no good way to tell someone you've been living a double life for 5 years, especially when that revelation comes alongside the news that you're acquiring their company. Whether he learns tonight or tomorrow morning doesn't fundamentally change the shock. The room fell silent, everyone recognizing the personal cost of the business decision we were implementing. Let's review the press statement once more, I said, redirecting focus to the task at hand. The statement was straightforward in its business language, but groundbreaking in its implications. Morgan Hospitality was acquiring Caldwell Hospitality, management in an all-cash transaction, consolidating our position as the leading innovative luxury hotel brand globally. The announcement would highlight the strategic benefits, projected synergies, and our plans for seamless integration. What it wouldn't mention was that the CEO of Morgan Hospitality was married to the CEO of Caldwell Hospitality, a revelation. That would undoubtedly become the focus of business media once the connection was discovered. Are we prepared for the personal angle when it emerges? I asked my PR director. As much as possible, she confirmed. We've prepared statements emphasizing that business decisions were made based on market factors and stakeholder value, not personal considerations. We'll stress that appropriate governance protocols were followed, with you recusing yourself from specific voting situations where conflicts might arise. I nodded, knowing these technicalities would satisfy legal requirements, but do little to mitigate the personal and public relations storm that would follow. And the market reaction? I turned to our financial team. Our modeling suggests Morgan stock will rise 8 to 12% on the news, while Caldwell's remaining public shares will see significant volatility before trading is likely halted pending the completion of the acquisition. The clinical discussion of what would happen to Ian's company, his life's work, felt surreal. I was simultaneously the architect of its acquisition and the wife of the man who would be most devastated by it. Next steps? I asked, drawing the meeting to a close. Everything is prepared for tomorrow's announcement, Isaac confirmed. The legal team has final documentation ready, the PR team has prepared comprehensive communications, and we've arranged early meetings with key clients to address any concerns. Excellent. Thank you all for your discretion and professionalism throughout this process. I know the personal complications have created additional challenges. As the team dispersed, Alex remained behind, concern evident in her expression. Are you sure about tonight? She asked once we were alone. It's not too late to cancel the dinner. Have a private conversation with Ian. I considered her suggestion, weighing it against the reality of my marriage and what I knew of my husband. Ian has spent 5 years seeing exactly what he expects to see, I replied. He looks at me and sees just a housewife, because that's what fits his worldview. A private conversation won't change that fundamental perception. At least this way? At least this way what? Alex pressed when I didn't finish. At least this way there will be witnesses to the moment he finally sees me, I admitted, recognizing the sadness in wanting such validation. People who know the truth, who can confirm that I'm not just a housewife planning dinner parties, but a CEO who built something significant. Alex squeezed my arm gently. He's the only one who didn't see it, Brooke. The rest of us have known all along. I smiled, gratefully at my friend, then glanced at my watch. I need to transform back into Brooke Caldwell. I have an anniversary dinner to prepare for. The dual nature of my life was never more apparent than in the contrasting preparation for professional events versus social ones. For board meetings, I selected power suits and statement jewelry, styled my hair for maximum authority, and moved with deliberate confidence. For Ian's business dinners, I chose elegant but understated dresses, subtle accessories, and cultivated a softer, more deferential presence. Tonight, knowing it would be the last time I played this role, I selected a deep blue dress that subtly showcased strength while still fitting Ian's expectations of appropriate attire for his wife. My jewelry was minimal but expensive. Anniversary gifts from Ian that represented his vision of our relationship. Beautiful ornaments that enhanced his status by association. As I applied my makeup, I studied my reflection, noting how easily I shifted between my two identities now, adjusting my posture, my expression, even the cadence of my speech depending on which version of myself I was portraying. The performance had become so second nature that sometimes I wondered if either version was entirely authentic anymore. My phone buzzed with a text from Ian. Leaving the office soon. Can't wait to see you. Big news to share tonight. I froze, momentarily concerned that somehow he had discovered the acquisition plans. But that was impossible. The information had been tightly controlled, with only the highest levels of management at both companies aware of the impending announcement. Looking forward to it. I have news too, I replied, the understatement of the decade. Whatever Ian's news was, it would pale in comparison to what tomorrow would bring. For tonight, I would play my role one last time. The supportive wife, the silent partner, the woman who knew her place. And tomorrow, the world, including my husband, would finally meet the real Brooke Morgan. As I prepared to leave my office, Isaac handed me a final document, the completed acquisition agreement, requiring only my signature to set everything in motion. The board has unanimously approved, he informed me. Once you sign, we're committed to tomorrow's announcement. Aye. took the document, the weight of it far exceeding its physical presence. With my signature, I would not only complete a major business transaction, but also irreversibly alter my personal life. "Thank you, Isaac," I said, taking the Mont Blanc pen he offered, a gift I'd received when Morgan Hospitality reached its first billion in valuation. I signed my name, Brooke Elizabeth Morgan, with the confident stroke I used for all major business decisions. Tomorrow, this signature would be public knowledge, no longer a secret identity, but my acknowledged professional self. "Have the car brought around," I instructed, slipping the signed document into a folder. "And make sure everything is in place for tomorrow morning's announcement." "Of course, Ms. Morgan, and good luck tonight." I smiled at his concern. After running a global hospitality company for 8 years, an anniversary dinner should be simple by comparison. But we both knew it wasn't the dinner that would be challenging. It was the knowledge of what would follow, the impending collision of my two carefully separated worlds. As my driver navigated through Manhattan traffic toward my penthouse where I would meet Ian before heading to the restaurant, I mentally prepared for the evening ahead. One last performance as Brooke Caldwell, devoted wife. One final night of Ian believing he understood who I was and what I was capable of. By morning, everything would change. The carefully constructed walls between my personal and professional lives would crumble, leaving me fully visible for perhaps the first time in our marriage. Whether that visibility would destroy our relationship or transform it remained to be seen, but one thing was certain. After tonight, there would be no going back to the comfortable fiction we had lived for 5 years. The car pulled up outside our building, and I took a deep breath, centering myself, before stepping into my role one last time. "Good evening, Mrs. Caldwell," the doorman greeted me. "Good evening, James," I replied with the warm smile of Brooke Caldwell, not the professional nod of Brooke Morgan. As the elevator ascended to the penthouse, I watched the numbers climb, feeling the weight of imminent revelation growing heavier with each floor. Tomorrow, the business world would be buzzing with news of Morgan Hospitality's acquisition of Caldwell Management. Tomorrow, Ian would discover that his wife, the woman he had consistently underestimated and publicly dismissed, was not just a CEO, but his CEO. Tomorrow would bring chaos, confrontation, and perhaps the end of my marriage. But tonight there was still a script to follow, a role to play, a performance to complete. The elevator doors opened on our penthouse, and I stepped into the foyer, hearing Ian moving about in the bedroom. I set down my bag, straightened my shoulders, and prepared for our anniversary dinner. The last act of a 5-year production that had gone on far longer than anyone could have anticipated. "Darling? Is that you?" Ian called out. "I'm almost. Ready? Wait until you hear my news." I smiled, a bittersweet expression hidden from his view. "I'm looking forward to it," I replied, my voice sliding easily into the softer register I used as his wife. "It's going to be quite a night." Ian emerged from our bedroom looking polished and confident in a tailored suit, his expression animated, with excitement I hadn't seen in months. "You look beautiful," he said, kissing my cheek. "The blue brings out your eyes." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely appreciating the compliment. Whatever our complications, there had always been attraction between us. "You mentioned news?" His smile widened as he adjusted his cufflinks, platinum with sapphire accents, a gift from me on his last birthday. "I'll save it for dinner. It's better with an audience." Something in his tone, the desire for witnesses to his moment, reminded me of why we were fundamentally different. Ian saw success as something to be displayed, validated through others' recognition. I had built my company largely in secret, finding satisfaction in achievements regardless of who knew about them. "The car is waiting," I said, gathering my evening bag. "Shall we?" The drive to the summit was filled with Ian's excited chatter about potential new investors, market opportunities, and his vision for Caldwell Hospitality's future, a future that, unbeknownst to him, would be dramatically different after tomorrow's announcement. I listened, nodding at appropriate intervals, feeling a growing heaviness with each enthusiastic projection he shared. The Middle Eastern Sovereign Wealth Fund is particularly promising, he continued. If we secure their investment, we could finally expand into the luxury desert resort market that Morgan keeps dominating. That sounds significant, I replied carefully, knowing that the very investors he was courting had already committed to supporting Morgan Hospitality's acquisition of his company. It's transformative, he confirmed, squeezing my hand. Exactly what Caldwell needs to take us to the next level. The irony wasn't lost on me. On our 5th anniversary, Ian was excitedly planning a future for a company that would cease to exist, independently by this time tomorrow. As our car pulled up to the summit, I recognized several vehicles belonging to Pinnacle executives: Reed Wilson's distinctive Bentley, Suzanne Reynolds's Tesla, Alex Moretti's Range Rover. The stage was set for a dinner that would be remembered for reasons nobody except my executive team could anticipate. Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, the maitre d' greeted us warmly. Your guests are waiting in the private dining room. The summit occupied the top floor of what had been my company's flagship New York property for the past 2 years, a fact Ian remained oblivious to despite having dined here several times. The restaurant's elegant design, with its sustainable materials and subtle nods to local culture, embodied everything Morgan Hospitality stood for: thoughtful luxury, environmental consciousness, and authentic experience. As we approached the private dining room, I could hear the murmur of conversation, the clink of glassware, the subtle notes of a jazz quartet playing in the background. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for the performance ahead. Ready to celebrate 5 wonderful years? Ian asked, his hand resting possessively on the small of my back. Absolutely, I replied, my smile carefully calibrated. The private dining room fell quiet as we entered. Around the elegantly set table sat 10 people, a mix of Pinnacle executives and their partners, along with 2 of Ian's closest business associates. What Ian didn't realize was that 8 of the 10 people in the room knew my true identity. Only Ian and his longtime friend, Johnny, remained in the dark. Welcome, everyone, Ian announced jovially. Thank you for joining us on this special evening. Reed Wilson stood, raising his champagne glass. To Ian and Brooke on their 5th anniversary, may the years ahead bring everything you both deserve. The toast was delivered with a knowing glance in my direction, the double meaning clear to everyone except Ian and Johnny. Thank you, Reed, Ian replied, pulling out my chair with a flourish. I couldn't have said it better myself. As we settled into our seats, I noticed Alex Moretti watching me with concern. She alone knew how difficult this evening would be for me, not just because of tomorrow's revelation, but because tonight would be the last time I played the role I had maintained for 5 years. Brooke, you look lovely as always, Suzanne Reynolds commented. That shade of blue is remarkably similar to the accent color in the new Morgan Hospitality marketing materials. I suppressed a smile at her deliberate provocation. Is it? What a coincidence. Ian, oblivious to the subtext, launched into host mode, ensuring glasses were filled and conversations flowing. He was in his element, commanding attention, directing the social dynamics, positioning himself as the successful executive with the perfect wife by his side. I understand congratulations are in order, Reed, Ian said as the first course was served. The Pinnacle portfolio has shown impressive growth this quarter. Reed nodded, dabbing his mouth with a napkin. Yes, our partnership with Morgan Hospitality continues to exceed expectations. Their innovative approach has transformed our properties. Innovation? Ian scoffed good-naturedly. That seems to be the buzzword everyone's fixated on these days. Whatever happened to tradition, to proven models of luxury service? The market evolves, Alex interjected smoothly. Guest expectations change. What worked a decade ago isn't necessarily what today's luxury traveler wants. Ian waved dismissively. Trends come and go. True luxury is timeless. I noticed the subtle exchanges of glances around the table, the shared knowledge that Ian's company was struggling precisely because of this resistance to evolution. The quarterly reports were public knowledge. Caldwell Hospitality had posted declining revenues for 6 consecutive quarters, while Morgan Hospitality continued its exponential growth. "What do you think, Brooke?" Reed asked, deliberately drawing me into the conversation. As someone who observes the industry, do you see value in innovation or tradition? The question was a gentle trap, and I knew it. Reed was offering me a chance to reveal my expertise, to step out of the role I had played for so long. "I think there's value in both," I replied diplomatically. "Tradition provides a foundation, but innovation ensures relevance." Ian chuckled, patting my hand condescendingly. "Listen to her, sounding like a business consultant. Darling, tell them about the charity gala you're planning. That's more your area of expertise." And there it was, the dismissal I had grown accustomed to, the casual relegation to topics deemed appropriate for just a housewife. I felt a flush of anger, but maintained my composed expression. "Actually, the Foundation Gala is quite business-oriented this year. We're focusing on sustainable hospitality practices." "Adorable," Ian said, turning to Johnny. "She picks up these terms from listening to my conference calls. Next thing you know, she'll be discussing RevPAR and occupancy metrics." Johnny laughed on cue, but the rest of the table shifted uncomfortably, aware that I could likely teach a masterclass on those very topics. "Speaking of business," Ian continued, his voice rising slightly as he prepared to share his news, "I have an exciting announcement." All eyes turned to him, including mine. Whatever he was about to share, he had kept it from me as well. Caldwell Hospitality has secured a tentative agreement with the Al Nasser Investment Group, he announced proudly. "They're prepared to inject $200 million into our expansion plans, pending final approval next week." The table responded with polite congratulations, though I noticed Reed and Suzanne exchange knowing glances. The Al Nasser Group was indeed a major investor in Morgan Hospitality. They had been part of the consortium supporting our acquisition of Caldwell. "That's wonderful news, Ian," I said, genuinely surprised. The Al Nasser Group must have been hedging their bets, maintaining negotiations with Caldwell while simultaneously backing our acquisition. "This means we can finally compete directly with Morgan in key markets," Ian continued, buoyed by the response. "Their CEO, what's her name? Morgan something? Won't know what hit her." I nearly choked on my wine at the direct reference to myself in the third person. Alex quickly jumped in to cover the awkward moment. "Brooke Morgan," she supplied. "She's quite well regarded in the industry." "Brooke?" Ian laughed. "What a coincidence sharing a name with my wife, though I imagine that's where the similarities end." He turned to me with what he clearly thought was an affectionate smile. "No offense, darling." "None taken," I replied, my tone even despite the surge of frustration. As the main course arrived, I noticed several phones discreetly buzzing around the table. The news of tomorrow's acquisition was being finalized, last details confirmed, press, releases prepared. The executives present were receiving updates even as they dined with the man whose company was being acquired. "Tell me, Reed," Ian said, cutting into his perfectly prepared steak. "What's she like? This Brooke Morgan who's supposedly revolutionizing the industry?" Reed, to his credit, maintained a completely neutral expression. "She's formidable, brilliant strategic thinker, exceptional attention to detail, very hands-on with her properties. And yet no public profile to speak of," Ian mused. "No interviews, rarely photographed. Seems odd for someone in hospitality, where personal brand is everything. Some leaders prefer to let their work speak for itself," Suzanne observed, raising her glass slightly in my direction. Or perhaps she's not comfortable in the spotlight, Ian suggested. Not everyone has the presence needed for high-level hospitality leadership. He squeezed my shoulder. It takes a certain gravitas, doesn't it, darling? I suppose it does. I agreed mildly. Though I hear she's quite impressive in person, Alex added. Commands absolute loyalty from her team. Ian shrugged dismissively. Loyalty, vision, whatever you want to call it. The numbers don't lie. And while Morgan might be the darling of the industry press right now, Caldwell has staying power. After my deal with Al Nasser closes, we'll see who's leading the luxury market. The conversation continued in this vein throughout the meal, Ian confidently outlining plans for a future that would never materialize. The executives around the table maintaining the charade while exchanging knowing glances, and me performing the role of supportive wife one last time. As dessert was served, a locally sourced, sustainable chocolate creation that was a signature of Morgan Hospitality Properties, Ian's bourbon consumption began to show in his loosening inhibitions and increasingly dismissive comments. The problem with hospitality today, he announced to the table, is too many people thinking they can reinvent the wheel. You know what guests really want? Consistency, predictability. Not some eco-friendly soap made by local artisans or whatever gimmick Morgan's pushing this quarter. I felt Alex stiffen beside me, knowing she had personally developed many of the sustainability initiatives Ian was mocking. Some might argue that innovation is precisely what's driving growth in the luxury segment, Reed countered mildly. Innovation, within boundaries, Ian insisted, his voice growing louder. There's a reason traditional luxury models endure. They work. All this talk about authentic experiences and conscious hospitality is just marketing jargon to justify charging premium prices for fewer amenities. I took a careful sip of water, maintaining my composure despite the direct attack on the sigh. Business philosophy I had pioneered. Around the table, expressions ranged from discomfort to barely concealed amusement at the irony of the situation. What do you think about these trends, Brooke? Suzanne asked pointedly. As someone who observes the industry through your foundation work. Again, the deliberate opening, the chance to reveal my expertise. Again, the decision to maintain my cover for a few hours more. I think different approaches serve different market segments, I offered diplomatically. Ian laughed, the sound slightly too loud. Always the peacemaker, my Brooke, but she knows I'm right. Tell them, darling, about our stay at that Morgan property in London, the one with the ridiculous mindfulness corner instead of a proper minibar. I found it rather refreshing, actually, I replied, unable to completely hide my pride in the concept I had personally developed. Different, but thoughtful. See what I mean? Ian turned to the table. She's too kind to say it was pretentious nonsense. That's what makes her the perfect partner. She balances my directness with diplomacy. The perfect partner. The phrase hung in the air, its irony almost unbearable. How could someone claim I was the perfect partner when he fundamentally misunderstood who I was? A toast, Ian declared suddenly, raising his bourbon glass. To 5 years with the most supportive wife a man could ask for. To Brooke, who knows exactly what a successful man needs, a beautiful home to return to, flawlessly executed dinner parties, and never, ever any competition for the spotlight. Glasses rose around the table, but the congratulatory murmurs were undercut by the obvious discomfort of those who knew the truth. I smiled graciously, playing my part while ignoring the flush of anger that threatened to break through my carefully maintained composure. Thank you, Ian, I replied, my voice steady despite the emotion churning beneath the surface. It's been an interesting 5 years. If he noticed the careful choice of words, interesting rather than wonderful or happy, he gave no indication. As the dessert plates were cleared, Ian's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression briefly darkening before he tucked it away. Everything all right? I asked. Fine, he replied tersely. Just the Al Nasser team requesting additional documentation before finalizing the investment. Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow. I nodded, knowing exactly why the Al Nasser Group was creating delays. By tomorrow, their investment would be directed toward the acquisition, not Ian's expansion plans. More bourbon, sir? The server asked, appearing at Ian's elbow. Absolutely, Ian replied, handing over his glass. We're celebrating. I noticed Alex glance meaningfully at her watch, then at me. The dinner was progressing exactly as I had anticipated. Ian's increasing bourbon consumption loosening his inhibitions, setting the stage for what would come next. I must say, Ian, Reed began carefully, given the market dynamics, I'm surprised the Al Nasser Group is investing in traditional luxury expansion. The trends seem to favor more innovative approaches. Ian's expression hardened slightly at the implied criticism. Trends are temporary. The Al Nassers understand that solid fundamentals outlast fads. Not everyone is chasing whatever Morgan Hospitality is doing this quarter. Morgan does seem to be setting the pace, Johnny observed, unwittingly poking the bear. Their stock is up what, 40% this year? Smoke and mirrors, Ian dismissed, his voice taking on the edge it always did when Morgan Hospitality was discussed. They're overextended. All that rapid expansion, all those innovative concepts, it's not sustainable. Their financials suggest otherwise, Suzanne noted mildly. Their profit margins are nearly double the industry average. Ian waved his hand dismissively. Creative accounting, most likely. Or they're sacrificing quality for quick returns. Either way, it won't last. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. The frustration of hearing my company's hard-earned success dismissed by someone who hadn't bothered to truly understand our business model. The fact that it was my husband made it more painful, not less. Actually, Alex interjected, unable to contain herself, Morgan's quality metrics lead the industry. Their guest satisfaction scores are consistently 15–20% higher than their nearest competitor. Ian's eyes narrowed slightly at her defense of my company. You seem quite informed about Morgan's operations, Alex. I try to stay current on industry. Leaders, she replied smoothly. Well, as someone who's been in this business for 20 years, Ian said, the condescension thick in his voice, I can tell you that what impresses industry publications doesn't always translate to long-term success. Morgan has a woman CEO, which makes for good press. But let's see if she has the staying power to build something enduring. The dismissive reference to a woman CEO sent a ripple of tension around the table. Several of the executives exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the gendered criticism. I understand she's built quite an impressive company already, Reed countered. From one boutique hotel to a global presence in less than a decade. With significant investment backing, Ian qualified, anyone can grow quickly with enough capital. The question is whether there's substance behind the expansion. I took a slow, deliberate sip of water, using the moment to compose myself. The irony was almost painful, Ian questioning the substance of the very company that was about to acquire his. What do you think makes for substance in hospitality, Ian? I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective now that the conversation had turned directly to my professional domain. He seemed pleased by my interest, leaning forward slightly. Tradition. Understanding what luxury travelers have always wanted. Consistency across properties. Recognizable opulence. A certain gravitas. That comes from experience and history. And innovation doesn't factor into that equation, Alex pressed. Innovation within established parameters, Ian clarified, unconsciously echoing our conversation from our first date 8 years earlier. You don't throw out the fundamentals. Because some industry consultant says guests suddenly want meditation cushions instead of Egyptian cotton sheets. Why not both? I suggested. Ian laughed, patting my hand indulgently. See? This is why I adore my wife, always looking for compromise. Darling, in business, sometimes there are clear right and wrong approaches. The luxury hospitality world has certain established truths that these newcomers like Morgan are challenging at their peril. And yet Morgan continues to outperform traditional luxury brands, Suzanne observed. Perhaps guests are voting with their reservations. Ian's expression darkened slightly, his ego clearly bruised by the continued defense of my company. Temporary novelty. Give it time. The fundamentals always reassert themselves. The conversation was growing increasingly tense, the subtext clear to everyone except Ian and Johnny. I decided to redirect slightly, aware that Ian's increasing intoxication was making him more defensive. Tonight is about celebration, not business debates, I suggested warmly. 5 years of marriage is worth focusing on, don't you think? Ian's expression softened immediately. Absolutely right, darling, always knowing how to bring me back to what matters. He raised his glass again. To my beautiful wife, who understands that her place is supporting my vision, not competing with it. The backhanded compliment hung in the air, its implications impossible to miss. Around the table, I could see the executives' reactions ranging, from discomfort to barely concealed outrage on my behalf. How exactly does Brooke support your vision, Ian? Reed asked, his tone carefully neutral despite the challenging question. Ian seemed delighted by the opportunity to expound on my role. Brooke creates the perfect environment for me to succeed. She manages our home beautifully, hosts flawless events that build valuable social connections, and, most importantly, he squeezed my shoulder with what he clearly thought was affection. She never tries to insert herself into business matters she doesn't understand. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the collective tension from those who knew my true identity, their restraint palpable as they witnessed this public diminishment. That must be comfortable for you, Suzanne observed. Her careful phrasing barely concealing her disapproval. It's ideal, Ian confirmed, oblivious to the undercurrents. I've seen too many colleagues' marriages suffer because their wives suddenly decided they needed careers of their own, competing priorities, separate identities. He shook his head, as if the very idea was absurd. Brooke understands that a successful marriage, like a successful business, needs clear roles. And your role is, Alex prompted, unable to hide her distaste entirely. To build something significant in the world, Ian replied without hesitation. To create a legacy. To lead. He gestured toward me. And Brooke's role is to support that mission, to create the foundation that makes it possible. I maintained my practiced smile, feeling the weight of every eye at the table. The assumptions underlying Ian's worldview were now fully exposed, his belief in a natural hierarchy where his ambitions automatically superseded mine, where my value was measured by how well I facilitated his success. What if Brooke wanted her own career? Reed asked quietly. Her own legacy? Ian laughed as if the question was absurd. Brooke knows where her talents lie. Don't you, darling? All eyes turned to me, the moment pregnant with possibility. I could end the charade now, reveal my identity before tomorrow's public announcement. But something held me back. Perhaps a desire to maintain control over the revelation. Perhaps a reluctance to create a scene that would overshadow the professional achievement of the acquisition. I believe everyone should use their talents effectively, I replied diplomatically. Exactly, Ian agreed, completely missing my careful phrasing. And Brooke's talents are in creating beautiful environments and meaningful social connections. She's exceptional at it, the perfect corporate wife. The perfect corporate wife. The phrase landed heavily, reaffirming that after 5 years of marriage, Ian still saw me primarily as an extension of himself, an accessory to his professional identity, rather than a person with ambitions of my own. I'm curious, Ian, Alex said, leaning forward slightly. In today's world, don't you think the concept of a corporate wife is somewhat outdated? His expression hardened slightly. Not at all. Traditional roles endure because they work, just like in business. Morgan Hospitality can push all the progressive narratives they want about changing luxury expectations, but fundamentally guests want the same things they've always wanted. And in marriage, he squeezed my shoulder again. A clear division of responsibilities creates harmony. And what would happen, Suzanne asked carefully, if that harmony was disrupted? If the traditional roles were reversed? Ian laughed, dismissively. You mean if I stayed home while Brooke ran a company? I think we all know that's not playing to our respective strengths. The condescension in his tone was unmistakable. Around the table, I noticed several executives shifting uncomfortably, aware of the dramatic irony unfolding before them. You don't think Brooke could run a company? Reed pressed, unable to resist the opening. Brooke? Ian glanced at me with indulgent affection. She's brilliant at what she does. Organizing our lives, managing our social calendar, running her little foundation. But the corporate world? The cutthroat hospitality industry? That requires a different temperament entirely. What temperament is that? Alex asked, her tone deceptively light. Decisiveness, strategic thinking, the ability to make tough calls without emotion clouding judgment. Ian raised his bourbon in a small salute to himself. Not everyone is built for that kind of pressure. Brooke thrives in her sphere, and I thrive in mine. That's why we work so well together. I felt a complex mix of emotions swirling beneath my carefully maintained composure. On one level, there was anger at being so fundamentally misunderstood by the man who claimed to love me. On another, there was a strange anticipation of tomorrow's revelation, when Ian would be forced to confront the fact that I possessed exactly the qualities he assumed I lacked. I'd say Brooke has excellent judgment, Reed commented, his gaze meeting mine briefly. In social matters, absolutely, Ian agreed, completely missing the subtext. She can read a room better than anyone, knows exactly which wine to pair with which course, which guests should be seated together, which charity causes will resonate with our circle. He turned to me with what he clearly thought was a compliment. She's mastered the art of making others comfortable, haven't you, darling? I try, I replied, maintaining my role for a few hours more. As coffee was served, Ian's phone buzzed again. This time his reaction was more pronounced, a frown followed by visible confusion. Everything okay? I asked, genuinely curious about what might be leaking about tomorrow's announcement. Fine, he replied tersely, tucking the phone away. Just some market chatter about Morgan Hospitality making a major move tomorrow. Probably nothing. I felt my pulse quicken slightly. The information was beginning to circulate in financial circles, as it inevitably would. We had planned for this official announcement at 9 a.m., but in the connected world of finance, rumors always preceded formal statements. What kind of move? Johnny asked, interested. Acquisition speculation, Ian dismissed, though who they think they're acquiring is anyone's guess. Probably another one of those boutique eco-lodges or some wellness retreat. He shook his head. As if anyone wants to pay luxury prices to eat kale and meditate. Alex caught my eye, briefly, silently asking if I wanted to redirect the conversation. I gave an almost imperceptible shake of my head. Let this play out naturally. Actually, Reed said carefully, I've heard Morgan Hospitality might be looking at more traditional properties, expanding their portfolio in interesting ways. Ian scoffed. Good luck to them. Traditional luxury requires a certain understanding of fundamentals that I doubt their leadership grasps. Their CEO seems quite capable, Suzanne observed mildly. Her track record speaks for itself. On paper, perhaps, Ian allowed. But there's more to leadership than metrics. There's presence, authority, a certain gravitas that you can't fake. And you don't think Brooke Morgan has that gravitas? Alex asked, barely concealing her amusement at the direct reference to me. Ian laughed. I've never met her, so I can't say. But generally speaking, the hospitality industry requires a certain commanding presence that women often struggle to project. No offense to the ladies present, he added, gesturing inclusively to Alex and Suzanne. But there's a reason traditional luxury hotels have historically been led by men. Guests respond to that authority. The casual sexism hung in the air, all the more striking for how unconsciously it was delivered. Ian genuinely seemed to believe what he was saying, to see no problem with his worldview. Interesting perspective, Reed said diplomatically. Though I must say, in my experience working with Morgan Hospitality, their leadership demonstrates remarkable presence. Ian shrugged, clearly unconvinced. We'll see how enduring that presence proves to be. The industry has seen plenty of rising stars flame out when market conditions shift. As the dinner wound toward its conclusion, I felt a strange sense of detachment settling over me. After 5 years of maintaining this dual identity, of listening to Ian dismiss capabilities I possessed in abundance, tomorrow would bring a reckoning that was both professional triumph and personal catharsis. Shall we call it a night? I suggested, noting Ian's increasing intoxication and the late hour. We should let everyone get home at a reasonable hour. Always thinking of others, Ian said approvingly. That's my Brooke, the perfect hostess. As the group began gathering their things, exchanging handshakes and air kisses, I caught Alex's eye. She moved closer under the pretense of saying goodbye. Are you sure about tomorrow? She asked quietly. Once the announcement goes live, there's no going back. I glanced at Ian, who was loudly explaining his expansion vision to a clearly uncomfortable Reed. I'm sure, I replied softly. It's time for the worlds to collide. Alex squeezed my arm supportively. We'll be ready for whatever comes. The team is behind you, professionally and personally. As we said our final goodbyes, Reed approached me while Ian was distracted with settling the bill. That was educational, he commented dryly. 8 years of hospitality leadership, and apparently I lack gravitas, I replied with a small smile. If he only knew. Reed shook his head. Tomorrow will be quite the revelation. For everyone, I agreed. The ride home was quiet. Ian lost in thought about the strange text messages he'd received, me contemplating the impending collision of my separate worlds. The bourbon had mellowed him somewhat, replacing his earlier bombastic energy with a more subdued reflection. Did you enjoy the evening? He asked, as our car navigated the late-night streets of Manhattan. It was memorable, I replied truthfully. You seemed quiet toward the end. I glanced at him, wondering if he had finally noticed my reaction to his dismissive comments. Did I? He nodded absently. Probably tired from all the planning. You put so much effort into these events. And there it was again. The assumption that my quietness must be physical fatigue from party planning rather than emotional exhaustion from being consistently underestimated. Yes, I agreed softly. It's been a long day. As our car pulled up to our building, Ian helped me out with the automatic courtesy that had always characterized our relationship. Whatever his flaws, he had always been technically considerate, holding doors, pulling out chairs, offering his coat if the temperature dropped. It was the deeper consideration, recognizing my capabilities, respecting my intelligence, seeing me as a full person rather than an extension of himself, that had been consistently absent. Thank you for a lovely anniversary, he said as we rode the elevator to our penthouse. It was certainly one to remember, I replied, the understatement of the decade given what would unfold tomorrow. In our bedroom, as Ian loosened his tie and prepared for sleep, he seemed to be mulling over something. Those texts about Morgan Hospitality making a move tomorrow, he said finally. Do you think there's anything to them? I met his gaze in the mirror as I removed my earrings. I suppose we'll find out in the morning. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with my non-answer. Whatever it is, it won't affect the Al Nasser deal. They're committed to traditional luxury, not whatever trendy concept Morgan is pushing these days. I said nothing, simply continuing my evening routine as I had for 5 years, removing makeup, changing into nightwear, applying face cream. The familiar choreography felt surreal knowing it was the last night of our old reality. "Brooke?" Ian said as we settled into bed. "Yes?" "Thank you for understanding what I need. Not every man is fortunate enough to have a wife who truly knows her place." In the darkness, he couldn't see my expression. The complex mix of sadness, frustration, and anticipation that his words evoked. "We all find our place eventually, Ian," I replied softly. "Sometimes it's just not where others expect us to be." He made a sleepy sound of agreement, missing the deeper meaning entirely. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened into sleep while I remained awake, contemplating the morning to come. Tomorrow, the carefully constructed walls between my worlds would collapse. Tomorrow, Ian would discover that his wife wasn't just a housewife, but the CEO who had built a hospitality empire that was now acquiring his company. Tomorrow, 5 years of being underestimated would culminate in a revelation that would forever change how he and the world saw me. But tonight, for a few more hours, I could lie in the peaceful quiet of the life I had constructed, preparing myself for the storm that would follow when the truth was finally revealed. I woke before dawn, slipping quietly from bed as Ian continued sleeping off the previous night's bourbon. For once, his tendency to overindulge worked in my favor, giving me the privacy I needed for this pivotal morning. In the guest bathroom, I transformed myself fully into Brooke Morgan, CEO. A power suit in Morgan Hospitality's signature blue, hair styled for authority rather than softness, makeup applied to enhance presence rather than beauty. Looking in the mirror, I barely resembled the housewife Ian had toasted last night. I left a note on the kitchen counter, "Early foundation meeting. See you tonight," knowing it would be the last time I used that particular cover story. Then, I gathered my things and slipped out of the penthouse while the city was still bathed in pre-dawn shadows. My driver was waiting, as always. "Good morning, Ms. Morgan," he greeted me, holding the door. "Good morning, David," I replied, settling into the back seat. "Directly to the office, please." As we navigated the quiet streets of early morning Manhattan, I reviewed the day ahead. The acquisition announcement was scheduled for 9 a.m. Before that, I had final meetings with our legal team, PR directors, and senior executives to ensure everything was in place. After the announcement, there would be media interviews, stakeholder calls, and the inevitable personal fallout with Ian. My phone buzzed with a text from Alex. "Everything ready. Team assembled. How are you feeling?" "Focused," I replied simply. It was true. Despite the personal complexities, I felt a clarity of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. Today, the division between my worlds would finally end. Whatever came next, at least I would be living authentically. The executive floor of Morgan Hospitality's headquarters was already buzzing with activity when I arrived. Isaac met me at the elevator, tablet in hand. "Good morning, Ms. Morgan. Legal is waiting in the conference room. PR has finalized the press release for your approval, and the executive team will be assembled by 7:30. "Thank you, Isaac. Coffee. First, please." In my office, I took a moment to gather myself before the whirlwind began. The wall of windows showcased a spectacular view of Manhattan coming alive in the morning light. Below, I could see our flagship hotel, the Morgan, its distinctive blue accent lighting still visible as dawn approached. I had built this company from a single boutique property to a global hospitality leader recognized for innovation, sustainability, and exceptional guest experiences. Today, that achievement would finally be fully public, my name and face attached to the success I had created. A soft knock announced Isaac's return with coffee. "The legal team is ready when you are." The next hour passed in a blur of final reviews and signatures. Our legal counsel walked me through the acquisition details one last time, confirming that all regulatory requirements had been met, all shareholder approvals secured. "The acquisition is sound from every angle," our chief counsel confirmed. Caldwell. Hospitality management stockholders are receiving a premium well above market value. There's no legitimate basis for challenge, even given the unusual personal situation. I nodded, signing the final documents with the same Mont Blanc pen I'd used for every major Morgan hospitality deal. Thank you for your thoroughness. Next came the PR team, with final versions of the press release, prepared statements for media inquiries, and a schedule of interviews for the day. We've prepared for every angle, our PR director assured me, including the personal connection. Our message is consistent. This acquisition is based on business fundamentals and represents the best outcome for all stakeholders. And the inevitable questions about why I kept my identity separate from my husband's company? I asked. We emphasize professional ethics. Your commitment to avoiding conflicts of interest by maintaining strict separation between your personal and professional lives. If pressed, we acknowledge that traditional gender expectations in the industry created additional complexities. I reviewed the messaging, making a few adjustments to ensure the tone was right, confident but not defensive, matter of fact about the personal situation without inviting unnecessary speculation. By 7:30, my executive team had assembled in the conference room. Looking around the table at these men and women who had helped build Morgan Hospitality, who had maintained my confidentiality for years while delivering exceptional results, felt a surge of gratitude. Good morning, everyone, I began. Today marks a significant milestone for Morgan Hospitality. The acquisition of Caldwell Hospitality Management represents our largest expansion to date and solidifies our position as the leading innovative luxury hotel brand globally. Nods of agreement around the table. But today also marks a personal milestone. I continued. After today, I will no longer be maintaining separate personal and professional identities. The world, including my husband, will know me as Brooke Morgan, CEO of this company. Alex spoke up. I think I speak for everyone when I say we're honored to have been part of building this company with you, and we're prepared for whatever comes next. Murmurs of agreement echoed around the table. Thank you, I said simply. Now, let's review the final integration plan for Caldwell Properties. For the next hour, we discussed operational details, which Caldwell Properties would be rebranded immediately, which would undergo renovation before joining the Morgan portfolio, and how key personnel would be integrated into our organization. Throughout the discussion, I maintained my focus on business fundamentals, pushing personal considerations aside. At 8:30, Isaac appeared at the conference room door. Ms. Morgan, I have an update on Mr. Caldwell's movements this morning. I had arranged discreet monitoring of Ian's schedule, wanting to be prepared for his reaction once the news broke. He arrived at Caldwell headquarters 20 minutes ago, Isaac reported. According to his assistant, he has a 9 a.m. meeting scheduled with his executive team regarding the Al Nasser investment. Perfect timing. Ian would be surrounded by his leadership team when the announcement broke, just as I would be surrounded by mine. Thank you, Isaac. Please continue monitoring and keep me updated on any developments. As our meeting concluded, I returned to my office for a final moment of preparation before the announcement. My phone showed several missed calls from various financial news outlets. The rumors were clearly circulating heavily now. At precisely 8:55, I gathered with the executive team in my office, where screens were set up monitoring financial news, channels, social media, and the stock tickers for both Morgan Hospitality and Caldwell Management. The press release goes live in 5 minutes, our PR director confirmed. Financial news channels have been alerted to expect a major announcement. I nodded, feeling strangely calm despite the magnitude of what was about to happen. 5 years of dual identity were about to end. Whatever came next, professionally or personally, would unfold in the light of full disclosure. 3 minutes, Isaac announced, eyes on his watch. Alex moved to stand beside me. Ready? Yes, I replied simply. 1 minute. Around the room, My executive team stood ready, tablets and phones prepared to respond to the flood of inquiries that would follow. The announcement. On the wall screens, financial news tickers scrolled across the bottom, while analysts speculated about merger and acquisition activity in the hospitality sector. 30 seconds. I took a deep breath, straightening my shoulders. Press release is live, our PR director announced. All channels simultaneously. On the screens, I watched as the announcement appeared. Morgan Hospitality acquires Caldwell Hospitality Management in landmark deal. Beneath the headline, details of the acquisition scrolled across screens. The all-cash transaction, the premium. Offered to Caldwell shareholders, the integration plans for properties and staff. And most significantly, a clear photograph of me, Brooke Morgan, CEO, alongside my professional biography. On another screen, the stock tickers began moving immediately, Morgan Hospitality shares rising, Caldwell's fluctuating wildly before. Trading was temporarily halted pending market absorption of the news. First media inquiries coming in, the PR team reported. Bloomberg, CNBC, and the Wall Street Journal all requesting immediate comment. I nodded, my attention fixed on another screen showing the lobby of Caldwell Hospitality's headquarters, where financial reporters were already gathering, hoping to catch reactions to the announcement. Ms. Morgan, Isaac said quietly. Mr. Caldwell's assistant reports that he just received the news in his executive meeting. He's reportedly not taking it well. I could imagine the scene, Ian surrounded by his leadership team, seeing the announcement that his company was being acquired, and then the shock of recognition as he saw my name and face identified as the CEO of Morgan Hospitality. 5 years of carefully maintained separation collapsing in an instant. CNN is running the story now, someone called out. On screen, the business anchor was speaking excitedly. Breaking news in the hospitality sector as Morgan Hospitality announces the acquisition of Caldwell Hospitality Management in a deal valued at $2.7 billion. In an unexpected twist, CEO Brooke Morgan is married to Caldwell CEO Ian Caldwell, a fact apparently unknown to Caldwell or industry insiders until today's announcement. The anchor turned to a financial analyst beside her. Michael, what do we make of this unprecedented situation? Well, Carol, it's certainly unusual. Morgan Hospitality has been the industry's innovation leader for several years, consistently outperforming traditional luxury brands including Caldwell. What makes this acquisition remarkable is not just the business implications, but the personal dimension. That the CEO orchestrating this takeover is married to the CEO whose company is being acquired. And apparently, he didn't know about his wife's role? That's what sources are telling us. Brooke Morgan has maintained a relatively low public profile despite building one of the most successful hospitality companies in the world. She reportedly kept her professional identity separate from her personal life, a division that ended dramatically with today's announcement. My phone buzzed, Ian calling. I let it go to voicemail, knowing any conversation now would be unproductive. Better to let him process the initial shock before attempting communication. CNBC requesting a live interview in 20 minutes, our PR director informed me. Confirm it, I nodded. And schedule the Bloomberg interview for 10:30. Ms. Morgan, Isaac appeared at my side again. Security reports that Mr. Caldwell has left the Caldwell headquarters and appears to be heading this direction. I had anticipated this. Have security prepare for his arrival. He should be escorted directly to my office when he arrives. As the executive team dispersed to manage various aspects of the announcement rollout, Alex remained by my side. Are you ready for him? She asked quietly. As ready as I can be, I replied. 5 years of preparation and I still don't know exactly how this plays out. Whatever happens, remember what you've built, she said, gesturing to the screens where the story of Morgan Hospitality's success was being broadcast globally. This company, this achievement, it's real, regardless of his reaction. I squeezed her arm gratefully. Thank you, Alex, for everything. Ms. Morgan, Isaac interrupted. CNBC is ready for your interview. I nodded, moving to the prepared area of my office where lighting had been set up for remote interviews. For the next 15 minutes, I answered questions about the acquisition with practiced precision, emphasizing the business fundamentals, the strategic fit, the benefits for shareholders and employees alike. The interviewer inevitably raised the personal dimension. Ms. Morgan, I have to ask about the unusual personal aspect of this acquisition. Your husband was the CEO of Caldwell Hospitality. Reports suggest he was unaware of your role at Morgan until today's announcement. Can you comment on that? I maintained my composure, delivering the response we had carefully prepared. Throughout my leadership of Morgan Hospitality, I've maintained a clear separation between my professional and personal lives. This approach allowed me to build this company based solely on business fundamentals and innovation, without complications, from personal relationships. Today's acquisition follows the same principle. It represents the best strategic direction for both companies, their employees, and their shareholders. But wasn't your husband blindsided by this announcement? Don't discuss private family matters in business contexts, I replied firmly. Today's announcement is about two companies combining to create an industry-leading hospitality group that will deliver exceptional experiences for guests worldwide. The interviewer tried once more. Still, it's unprecedented for a CEO to acquire her husband's company without his prior knowledge. How do you respond to those who might question the ethics of that approach? Morgan Hospitality has followed all regulatory requirements, corporate governance standards, and ethical guidelines throughout this process. I recused myself from any discussions where personal conflicts might arise, and independent board members provided additional oversight. This acquisition has been approved by shareholders of both companies and represents fair value for all stakeholders. The interview concluded, and I had barely removed my microphone when Isaac appeared again. Mr. Caldwell has arrived in the building. Security is escorting him up now. I nodded, taking a deep breath. This was the moment 5 years in the making, the collision of my carefully separated worlds. Give us privacy when he arrives, I instructed. Hold all calls unless absolutely urgent. Isaac nodded, slipping out as the elevator chime announced an arrival on our floor. Through the glass walls of my office, I could see the security team, escorting Ian down the hallway. His normally immaculate appearance was disheveled, tie loosened, hair mussed as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly, his expression a mix of shock, anger, and confusion. I stood behind my desk, straightening my shoulders and lifting my chin slightly, the posture of Brooke Morgan, CEO, not Brooke Caldwell wife. This conversation would set the tone for everything that followed, and I was determined to maintain my professional dignity regardless of Ian's reaction. The security team stopped at my office door. I nodded, giving permission for Ian to enter. Alone. The door opened. Ian stopped on the threshold, staring at me as if seeing a stranger. In many ways, he was. The woman standing behind the CEO's desk in a power suit and confident posture bore little resemblance to the supportive wife he believed he had married. Brooke? His voice held disbelief, as if he still couldn't reconcile the woman before him with the wife he thought he knew. Hello, Ian, I replied calmly. Please come in. He stepped inside, the door closing behind him with a soft click that somehow emphasized the magnitude of the moment. His gaze darted around my office, taking in the expansive space, the wall, of windows overlooking Manhattan, the multiple screens still displaying news of the acquisition, the awards and recognitions lining the credenza behind my desk. What is this? He finally managed, gesturing vaguely at the surroundings. What the hell is happening? Please, sit down. I indicated the chairs across from my desk. I don't want to sit down. His voice rose sharply. I want to know what the fuck is going on. I wake up to find you gone, go to my office for a meeting about the Al Nasser investment, and suddenly every screen is announcing that Morgan Hospitality is acquiring my company, and that my wife is the CEO of Morgan? I met his gaze steadily. Yes, I am Brooke Morgan, CEO of Morgan Hospitality Group. I have been for 8 years, since before we met. Ian stared at me, his expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and dawning anger. This is impossible. This is some kind of elaborate joke. It's not a joke, Ian. Morgan Hospitality has acquired Caldwell Hospitality Management in an all-cash transaction approved by both companies' boards and shareholders. The deal closed yesterday and was announced this morning. He braced himself against the back of the visitor's chair, his knuckles whitening. You're telling me that my wife, the woman who plans our dinner parties and runs a small charity foundation, is actually the CEO of Morgan Hospitality? The company that's been our biggest competitor for years? The company that just acquired mine? Yes, I replied simply. For how long? He demanded, his voice rising. How long have you been living this double life? I've been CEO of Morgan Hospitality for 8 years. I founded the company with my inheritance and one boutique hotel in San Francisco. When we met 5 years ago, you assumed I worked in hospitality administration. You never asked in what capacity, and by the time our relationship progressed, correcting that assumption became complicated. Complicated? He nearly shouted the word. You've been lying to me for our entire relationship. You stood by while I discussed business strategies, complained about competitors, about your company, and never once thought to mention that you were the CEO of Morgan Hospitality? I never lied about my identity, Ian. I simply allowed you to make assumptions. Assumptions you never questioned because they fit your worldview about what a wife should be. His face flushed with anger. Don't turn this around on me. This isn't about my worldview. It's about basic honesty in a marriage. You deliberately concealed your professional identity for 5 years. Did I? I countered, my composure still intact despite his escalating anger. My professional achievements were public record. Morgan Hospitality's CEO was named in every press release, every annual report, every industry recognition. The information was available to anyone who cared to look. But you knew I didn't know, he shot back. You maintained this elaborate charade, the foundation office, the charity events, the separate schedules, deliberately keeping me in the dark. Yes, I acknowledged. I did, and at first, it wasn't intentional. But over time, as I observed, how dismissive you were of women in business, how condescending about my capabilities, how convinced of your own superiority, I made a choice to maintain the separation. He paced a few steps, running his hands through his hair. So this was, what, some kind of social experiment, a test I failed? No, Ian. It was a business decision initially. Keeping my professional and personal lives separate seemed simpler, cleaner. It became more complicated as our companies became more directly competitive. And the acquisition? Was that a business decision too? Or was it personal, revenge for all the times I allegedly underestimated you? I maintained eye contact, refusing to be provoked into matching his emotional tone. The acquisition was recommended by our strategy team, approved by our board, and accepted by your shareholders because it represents the best value for all stakeholders. My personal connection to you was disclosed to our board, and I recused myself from specific voting situations where conflicts might arise. How magnanimous, he sneered. Following proper corporate governance while destroying my company and humiliating me professionally. The company was already struggling, Ian. Caldwell Hospitality has posted declining revenues for 6 consecutive quarters. Your traditional model isn't connecting with today's luxury travelers. The acquisition actually saves jobs and properties that might otherwise have been lost. And you couldn't have discussed this with me? Given me some warning, some chance to prepare? Instead, I had to learn about it on CNN along with everyone else in the industry? I sighed, acknowledging the personal cost of the business decision. I considered telling you privately, but each time I imagined that conversation, I couldn't see a path where it ended productively. Your reaction now confirms that assessment. My Reaction? He laughed incredulously. What did you expect? Gratitude that my wife secretly orchestrated a hostile takeover of my company? It wasn't hostile, Ian. Your board and shareholders approved the deal because it offered premium value above market price. And as for what I expected, I paused, choosing my words carefully. I wasn't sure. Perhaps shock, certainly. Anger, probably. But maybe eventually, a recognition that I built something significant. The very thing you claimed last night that women lack the capability to create in this industry. The reminder of his words from the previous evening's dinner struck home. I could see the memory flash across his face, his confident assertions about women in hospitality, his dismissive comments about Morgan's leadership, his patronizing remarks about my capabilities, all delivered in front of executives who knew the truth. Last night, he said slowly, realization dawning. They all knew, didn't they? Reed, Suzanne, Alex. They all knew you were their boss, not just my wife. Yes, I confirmed. They knew. So I was the entertainment, the joke, the clueless husband proclaiming his business expertise to his wife's employees. No one was laughing at you, Ian. They were uncomfortable with the situation. Several of them suggested I should tell you sooner. Then why didn't you? He demanded, the hurt now visible beneath the anger. 5 years, Brooke. 5 years of deception. Moved from behind my desk, reducing the physical barrier between us. The longer it continued, the harder it became to end. At first, it was just a withheld detail. Then it became a pattern of omission. Eventually, it was a full-fledged secret identity. Each passing day made revelation more difficult, not less. That's not an answer, he pressed. Why maintain the charade for so long? What did you gain from it? I considered the question carefully, owing him honesty now, if nothing else. Perspective, I said finally. I gained perspective that few women in my position could ever access. I saw firsthand how differently I was treated when perceived as just a housewife versus a CEO. I experienced the casual dismissal of my intelligence, the assumptions about my capabilities, the condescension masked as affection. So I was your case study in sexism? Your living research project? His voice was bitter. No, Ian. You were my husband. A husband who believed he knew me while fundamentally misunderstanding who I was. A husband who claimed to value me while consistently underestimating me. A husband who declared me perfect precisely because I appeared to have no ambitions that might compete with his. He flinched at the accuracy of the assessment. And now? What happens now? A soft knock interrupted us. Isaac's voice came through the intercom. Ms. Morgan, Bloomberg is ready for your interview in 5 minutes. Thank you, Isaac. I'll be right there. I turned back to Ian. I have media commitments for the next several hours. This is a significant business announcement that requires my attention regardless of our personal situation. Of course, he said, his tone suddenly flat. Business first. Isn't that what you've always prioritized? The accusation stung, but I didn't allow it to show. I've prioritized building something meaningful, something significant, just as you have, Ian. The difference is that I've had to do it while maintaining a separate identity to accommodate your expectations of what a wife should be. My expectations? He laughed bitterly. What about basic expectations of honesty in a marriage? Or does your achievement exempt you from that obligation? No, I acknowledged. It doesn't. And we can discuss this at length later. But right now, I have responsibilities to our employees, shareholders, and partners that can't wait. Our employees? He seized on the phrasing. They're your employees now, aren't they? Just like I'm effectively your employee, if I even still have a position. Your role at Caldwell will transition as outlined in the acquisition documents, I said, deliberately maintaining professional language. As with all executives, there will be evaluations to determine optimal positioning within the integrated organization. Perfect corporate speak, he sneered. Very CEO-like. Much more authentic than the supportive wife act you've been performing. The comment cut deeper than I wanted to admit. Had my role as his wife been merely a performance? No. There had been genuine connection, real affection, authentic moments. The deception had been about my professional identity, not my feelings. Ian. I softened my tone slightly. I understand this is shocking and painful. I'm not dismissing that. But right now, there are thousands of employees waiting to hear what this acquisition means for their jobs, their futures. I need to address that responsibility. Always the responsible one, he said, his anger seemingly deflating into something closer to resignation. Fine, go be the CEO. We both know that's who you really are anyway. As he turned to leave, I called after him. Ian, we should talk tonight, properly, without the initial shock clouding everything. He paused at the door, not turning around. I don't know if there's anything left to say, Brooke, or even who I'd be saying it to, my wife or the CEO who acquired my company. The door closed behind him with a decisive click, leaving me alone in my office with the weight of 5 years of dual identity finally lifting, but bringing new complications in its wake. Isaac appeared moments later. Bloomberg is ready for you, Ms. Morgan. I nodded, straightening my blazer and smoothing my expression. Whatever personal turmoil was unfolding, I had professional responsibilities that couldn't wait. The very qualities that had made me successful. As a CEO, focus, composure under pressure, the ability to compartmentalize, would now serve me in navigating the aftermath of my worlds colliding. I'm ready, I said, moving toward the interview setup. For the next 3 hours, I moved through media appearances with practiced precision, explaining the business rationale for the acquisition, outlining integration plans, addressing concerns about job security and brand positioning. The personal dimension was inevitably raised in every interview, but I maintained consistent messaging. This was a business decision based on market fundamentals. My personal connection to Ian Caldwell had been properly disclosed and managed through appropriate governance protocols. By early afternoon, the financial markets had rendered their initial verdict on the acquisition. Morgan Hospitality shares were up 11%, while trading in Caldwell Hospitality had been halted until the acquisition completed. Business analysts were predominantly positive about the strategic fit, with several noting that Morgan's innovative approach could revitalize Caldwell's struggling traditional properties. But beneath the professional execution, I felt the weight of the personal earthquake that had been triggered. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Ian, followed by a single text. I've gone to the Hamptons house. Don't follow me. I need space to process this. I respected his request, focusing instead on managing the business transition. My executive team rallied around me, handling operational details and providing the support I needed to navigate both the professional and personal dimensions of the day. How are you holding up? Alex asked during a brief break between calls. I'm fine, I replied automatically. Brooke? She pressed gently. It's me. You don't have to maintain the CEO facade. I sighed, allowing a glimpse of the emotional toll. It's complicated. Professionally, this is everything we've worked toward. The acquisition makes perfect strategic sense. The market reaction is positive. The integration plans are solid. But personally, your marriage may be collateral damage, she finished when I trailed off. Yes, I admitted. Though, in truth, I'm not sure what we really had. A marriage built on a fundamental misunderstanding of who I am. Was that ever real? Parts of it were, Alex suggested. The parts where he saw your intelligence, your grace under pressure, your ability to connect with people. Those insights were real, even if he misattributed their source. I considered her perspective, grateful for the nuance. Perhaps, but he never saw me completely, never recognized my capabilities in the domains he valued most. Is that a foundation that could have survived even without today's revelation? Before she could answer, Isaac appeared with an update. Caldwell executives are assembled in Conference Room A. They're understandably concerned about their positions in the integrated company. I nodded, pushing personal considerations aside once more. I'll address them directly. They deserve clarity about their future. The meeting with Caldwell's executive team was tense, but necessary. These men and women had built their careers at a company that was now being absorbed into mine, and their anxiety was palpable as I entered the conference room. "Thank you all for coming," I began, taking the seat at the head of the table. "I understand this is an unsettling day for everyone associated with Caldwell Hospitality. I want to provide clarity about our integration plans and answer your questions directly." For the next hour, I outlined our approach, which positions would be maintained, which would be consolidated, how property management would transition, what the timeline looked like. I was honest about the challenges ahead, but also emphasized the opportunities created by combining our strengths. "Many of you are wondering about Ian," I acknowledged, addressing the elephant in the room. "His future role will be determined through the same evaluation process as all executives. Our personal relationship has no bearing on organizational decisions." "With respect, Ms. Morgan," one of the Caldwell VPs spoke up. "That's difficult to believe given the circumstances. You kept your identity secret from your husband for 5 years while simultaneously competing with and now acquiring his company. How can we trust that personal factors won't influence professional decisions?" It was a fair question, one I had anticipated. "My track record speaks for itself," I replied. "Morgan Hospitality has grown based on business fundamentals, not personal considerations. The same principles will guide the integration process. Every decision will be documented, justified by business metrics, and reviewed by our board to ensure fairness." As the meeting concluded, I felt the weight of 20 years of collective anxiety in the room. These people had built their careers at Caldwell, and now their professional futures were in the hands of a woman most of them had only known as their CEO's wife. "My door is open," I assured them as we finished. "This transition works best with transparency and open communication. I welcome your input as we move forward together." By late afternoon, the initial shockwaves of the announcement had begun to settle into a more manageable rhythm of integration planning, stakeholder communications, and operational adjustments. I returned to my office to find Isaac waiting with a comprehensive update. "The press coverage has been predominantly positive," he reported. "Business analysts are focusing on the strategic fit rather than the personal angle, though tabloids are naturally emphasizing the husband-wife dynamic. Social media reaction is mixed, but trending positive, with significant discussion about gender dynamics in corporate leadership." I nodded, scanning the summaries he provided. "And the Al Nasser Group? They've confirmed their investment will proceed as planned, now directed toward the integrated company rather than Caldwell independently. Their statement emphasizes confidence in your leadership and the strategic vision for the combined entity." "Good. That addresses a major concern for Caldwell shareholders." I glanced at my watch, nearly 6:01 p.m. The day had passed in a blur of professional obligations, with the personal dimensions pushed aside by necessity. "Any word from Ian?" "Nothing official," Isaac replied carefully. "Those security reports. He returned briefly to your penthouse around noon, presumably to collect some personal items, then departed with luggage." I absorbed this information, recognizing its significance. Ian wasn't coming home tonight, perhaps not for some time. The physical separation mirrored the emotional and professional one that had been dramatically revealed today. "Thank you, Isaac. You can go home now. It's been a long day for everyone." "Are you sure? I can stay if you need anything else." "I'm sure. Go home to your family." After he left, I stood at the window of my office, watching the city transition from day to evening. The lights of Manhattan began flickering on, including those of Morgan, hospitality properties visible from my vantage point. The empire I had built, an empire that until today, my husband hadn't known was mine. My phone buzzed with a text from Alex. Heading out. Need company tonight? Thank you, but no, I replied. I need some time alone to process everything. The truth was, I didn't know what I was feeling. Professional triumph mixed with personal loss. Liberation from the burden of dual identity alongside uncertainty about what came next. Relief that my achievements were finally fully acknowledged, tempered by sadness at the price paid for that recognition. As the office quieted, employees departing after the momentous day, I remained at my window, contemplating the future that had been irreversibly altered by today's revelation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, integration meetings, employee concerns, media inquiries, and the ongoing personal fallout with Ian. But tonight, in the quiet aftermath of worlds colliding, I allowed myself a moment to simply breathe, to exist in the space between who I had been and who I would become now that the walls between my identities had finally crumbled. The CEO who had hidden in plain sight was now visible to everyone, including, finally, her husband. Whatever came next, at least it would unfold in the light of truth rather than the shadows of necessary deception. The penthouse felt eerily silent when I finally returned home that night. For 5 years, this space had been the stage for my performance as just a housewife. Every detail carefully selected to maintain the illusion Ian expected. Now, standing in the entryway, I saw it through new eyes. A beautiful prison of expectations I had allowed to contain me. Ian's absence was evident immediately. His favorite bourbon was missing from the bar cart, his laptop gone from the desk in the corner, the framed photo of us from our honeymoon no longer on the side table. He had gathered the essentials for an extended absence. I moved through the rooms, shedding my CEO persona with each step, kicking off the heels that had carried me through a day of presentations and interviews, unpinning my hair from its severe style, removing the power suit that armor-plated me against the business world's scrutiny. In the master bathroom, I washed away the makeup that had been applied for authority rather than enhancement, watching as the mask of Brooke Morgan, CEO, literally dissolved down the drain. Standing in my robe, face bare, hair loose around my shoulders, I caught my reflection in the mirror and paused. Who was I now? For 5 years, I had maintained discrete identities, the supportive wife at home, the commanding CEO at work. With those boundaries shattered, what remained? Who was the real Brooke underneath the carefully constructed personas? My phone buzzed. On the counter, another media request, another interview asking about the shocking personal dimension of the acquisition. I ignored it, turning instead to the window where Manhattan's skyline glittered against the night sky. Somewhere out there, Ian was processing the revelation that his wife wasn't who he thought she was, or perhaps more accurately, was far more than he had allowed himself to see. I poured myself a glass of wine and settled onto the terrace, feeling the cool evening air against my skin. The day's events played through my mind in fragments. Ian's face when he first entered my office, the expressions of the Caldwell executives as I outlined integration plans, the carefully worded media responses I had delivered again and again. Beneath, the professional execution had been an emotional earthquake, its aftershocks still rippling through me, liberation mingled with loss, triumph with sadness, relief with uncertainty. The weight of dual identity had been lifted, but in its place came the burden of reconciliation, or perhaps separation. My phone buzzed again. This time I checked it. A text from Reed Wilson. Remarkable performance today. The team is impressed with your grace under pressure. Let me know if you need anything. I appreciated his support, but didn't respond. What I needed tonight couldn't be provided by colleagues, no matter how well-intentioned. I needed space to process the transformation that had occurred, not just professionally, but personally. For years, I had justified my deception as necessary, as a response to Ian's limitations. But sitting alone in the penthouse that had been the stage for my performance, I confronted more uncomfortable truths. Had I enabled Ian's diminishment of me by playing along? Had I, in maintaining the charade, been complicit in perpetuating the very stereotypes I claimed to reject? Had I denied him the opportunity to grow by never challenging his assumptions directly? These questions had no simple answers. The path to my current situation had been built from countless small decisions, each seemingly reasonable in isolation, but collectively creating an unsustainable contradiction. My phone rang, Alex calling to check on me. I let it go to voicemail, not ready to engage even with my closest confidant. Tonight was for reflection, for sitting with the complexity of what had happened and what might come next. Around midnight, exhaustion finally overcame contemplation. I moved to the bedroom, our bedroom, feeling the absence of Ian's presence acutely. For all the complications of our marriage, for all his limitations in seeing me completely, there had been comfort in the physical routine of sharing space. Now that comfort was gone, replaced by an emptiness that mirrored the emotional void opened by today's revelation. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams of boardrooms transforming into dining rooms, of signing acquisition documents that morphed into divorce papers, of Ian's face cycling between anger, hurt, and something that might have been respect if given the chance to develop. I woke before dawn, a habit formed from years of early meetings and international calls. For a moment, in the liminal space between sleep and full consciousness, I reached for Ian before remembering he wasn't there. Might never be there again in the same way. The realization propelled me from bed. Whatever emotional processing remained, to be done, I still had a company to run, an acquisition to implement, employees depending on me for leadership. The personal dimensions would have to be addressed in the margins of those responsibilities. I showered and dressed deliberately, selecting an outfit that balanced the authority needed for day 2 of acquisition announcements with subtle feminine elements I'd often downplayed in my CEO role. Today, I would begin integrating my own identities even as we integrated 2 companies. As I prepared to leave for the office, I noticed an envelope on the entryway table that hadn't been there the night before. My name was written in Ian's distinctive handwriting. Apparently, he had returned while I was asleep. For a moment, I considered leaving it unopened. Whatever it contained, accusations, legal threats, a demand for divorce, would shape the day ahead. But uncertainty was more destabilizing than even painful knowledge. I opened the envelope and unfolded a single page. Brooke, I'm still processing the events of yesterday. The revelation of your professional identity, the acquisition of my company, the understanding that our entire marriage has existed on a foundation of omission, if not outright deception. I've gone to the Hamptons to think. I need space and time to separate my professional humiliation from our personal relationship, if such separation is even possible now. What hurts most isn't losing my company. It's realizing that you never trusted me enough to show me who you really are. That for 5 years, you watched me build strategies to compete with your company without ever saying a word. That you sat through countless dinners where I dismissed the very capabilities you were exercising every day. I keep asking myself why. Why maintain the charade for so long? Was it just to prove I was as dismissive as you believed? Was it a deliberate strategy to gain competitive advantage? Or was it simpler? Did you just enjoy the power of knowing something I didn't? I don't know if our marriage can survive this level of deception, but before making any decisions, I need to understand why. Not the corporate explanation you gave the media, but the real reason you chose to be just a housewife to a man who, it turns out, was actually your business subordinate all along. When you're ready to have that conversation, the real conversation, not the CEO version, you know where to find me. Ian I folded the letter carefully and returned it to the envelope. His questions were fair, his hurt understandable. But his framing revealed that he still didn't fully grasp the dynamics that had created our situation. His automatic assumption that I had been just a housewife to him, rather than recognizing that he had imposed that limitation on a woman who was always much more. Still, beneath the lingering blindness to his own role, I saw something that surprised me, a willingness to understand, to process rather than simply react. He hadn't immediately filed for divorce or launched a public counter-narrative. He was, in his own way, seeking comprehension before conclusion. Tucked the letter into my bag and headed for the elevator. The conversations Ian wanted would come, but first, I had responsibilities to the thousands of employees now looking to me for direction in the wake of yesterday's announcement. The office was already buzzing when I arrived, the energy different, from the previous morning's controlled anticipation. Now there was the organized chaos of implementation. Integration teams meeting in glass-walled conference rooms, communications staff managing the ongoing media narrative, HR representatives, preparing to address employee concerns across both organizations. Isaac met me at the elevator, tablet in hand as always. "Good morning, Ms. Morgan. The executive team is assembled for the 8 a.m. integration update. The first group of Caldwell property managers will be joining via video conference at 9:30. Legal has prepared responses to 3 shareholder inquiries about the acquisition process, and..." He hesitated slightly. "There have been several media requests specifically about your personal situation with Mr. Caldwell. Thank you, Isaac. We'll maintain our existing messaging on personal matters. This acquisition is about business fundamentals, not personal relationships." I moved toward my office, then paused. "Has there been any communication from Ian this morning?" "No, Ms. Morgan. Security confirms he's at the Hamptons property based on the house alarm system activation." I nodded, unsurprised. Ian would take his time processing this new reality, as would I. The morning unfolded in a structured sequence of meetings, briefings, and strategic decisions. The familiar rhythm of executive leadership providing stability amid personal uncertainty. By lunchtime, we had addressed the most pressing integration concerns, reassured anxious employees about job security, and navigated several challenging media inquiries. I was reviewing property transition plans when Alex appeared in my doorway. "Got a minute?" "Of course," I gestured to the visitor's chair. "Integration proceeding as expected?" "Operationally, yes," she confirmed, closing the door behind her. "But there's another dimension we need to discuss." I raised an eyebrow, waiting. The Caldwell executive team, particularly the senior VPs, are struggling with the personal dynamics. They've worked closely with Ian for years. Many consider him a mentor and friend. Now they're reporting to his wife, who they previously knew only as a social acquaintance. "I anticipated some adjustment difficulties," I acknowledged. "What specifically are you hearing?" "Confusion, primarily. Concerns about where their loyalties should lie. Questions about whether working effectively with you implies betraying Ian. It's creating hesitation in decision-making, especially around integration steps that will significantly alter Caldwell's operating model. I considered this challenge, understanding its complexity. Arrange a private lunch with the 5 most senior Caldwell executives. No formal agenda, no presentations, just conversation." Alex nodded. "Already scheduled for tomorrow, but there's another dimension we should address." "Ian?" I surmised. "Yes. Whatever personal resolution you reach or don't reach, we need clarity on his professional role going forward. The organization can't function effectively with that question unanswered." She was right, of course. Despite my insistence on separating personal and professional matters, the two were inextricably linked in this unique situation. Ian was both my husband and a significant figure in the company we had just acquired. His future role, or absence, would impact everything from executive dynamics to brand positioning. I'll speak with him this weekend, I decided. Until then, we maintain the position that all executive roles are being evaluated as part of the integration process, including his. Alex nodded, then hesitated. Brooke, how are you really? Not as CEO, but as a person whose life just underwent a seismic shift? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on managing the professional dimensions that I'd pushed the personal aspects aside. I'm processing, like everyone else. Did he reach out? I nodded. A letter. He's at the Hamptons house thinking things through. Wants to understand why I maintained the deception for so long. And do you know the answer to that question? I sighed, allowing some of my carefully maintained composure to slip in the presence of my oldest friend. The easy answer is that it started small and grew until revelation seemed impossible. But the truth is more complicated. Usually is, Alex observed. Want to talk about it? Not yet, I admitted. I need to understand it myself before I can explain it to anyone else, including Ian. She accepted this with a nod. When you're ready, day or night, I'm here. After she left, I returned to the operational tasks before me. But Ian's question echoed beneath each decision, each conversation. Why? Why maintain the charade for so long? The professional answers were clear. Avoiding conflicts of interest, maintaining separation between competing companies, preventing complications in business relationships. But the personal ones remained murky, tangled in complex emotions and patterns established over years. By late afternoon, the immediate crisis management phase of the acquisition was transitioning into more structured implementation. I found myself, with a rare quiet moment, staring out my office window at the Manhattan skyline, the same view I'd contemplated the previous night from the penthouse. My phone buzzed with a text from Reed Wilson. Interesting development. Ian just requested a meeting with the Pinnacle executive team tomorrow morning. I frowned, surprised by this move. The Pinnacle executives now reported to me through the acquisition structure. What was Ian hoping to accomplish by meeting with them independently? Did they agree? I texted back. Yes, out of respect for his position, but they wanted you to know. Thank you for the transparency. Let me know what transpires. I set down the phone, considering the implications. This was Ian's first professional move since the acquisition announcement. Not withdrawal, not capitulation, but engagement with key stakeholders. Whether it represented acceptance, resistance, or something else entirely remained to be seen. My executive assistant appeared at the door. Ms. Morgan, the Wall Street Journal is requesting final comment for their feature on the acquisition. They're specifically asking about succession planning for leadership of the combined entity. Tell them leadership structure will be announced following the completion of our integration assessment, with a focus on positioning the most qualified executives to drive our combined growth strategy. The corporate speak flowed easily, masking the personal complications beneath the business decision. Would Ian have a place in the integrated company? Could he accept a position reporting to me, directly or indirectly? Could I effectively lead an organization with my husband in a senior role, given our unresolved personal situation? These questions had no immediate answers. Like so much about the current situation, they would unfold in the coming days and weeks, as both the professional integration and personal reckoning progressed. As evening approached, I made a decision. Instead of returning to the empty penthouse, I would go to our Hamptons house and begin the conversation Ian had requested. The organizational questions couldn't be fully resolved until the personal ones were at least addressed, and another night of separate processing wouldn't bring us closer to resolution. I called my driver and instructed Isaac to clear my Saturday morning calendar. Whatever came from the conversation with Ian, I would need space to process it before returning to professional obligations. The drive to the Hamptons provided time for reflection, for organizing the thoughts and feelings that had been suppressed beneath the demands of managing the acquisition rollout. By the time we turned onto the private road leading to our beach house, I had prepared myself for several possible scenarios, from reconciliation to rejection, from professional compromise to personal ultimatum. What I wasn't prepared for was the sight that greeted me as we approached the house. Ian sitting on the deck overlooking the ocean, reading what appeared to be one of my company's annual reports. Beside him was a stack of similar documents: Morgan Hospitality financial statements, press releases, industry analyses of our growth strategy. He was studying my professional accomplishments with the same intensity he brought to his own business. Challenges, making an effort to understand the company I had built while he wasn't looking. It was a small gesture, perhaps, but a meaningful one. An acknowledgement that there was substance behind the revelation, achievements worthy of serious consideration. As my car crunched on the gravel driveway, he looked up. Our eyes met across the distance, both of us recognizing that whatever happened next would determine not just our personal future, but the professional integration of two companies and the thousands of employees depending on our ability to navigate this unprecedented situation. The real conversations and the real work of reconciliation or separation were about to begin. I instructed my driver to return in the morning and approach the house alone. Ian remained seated, watching my advance with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not the anger from our office confrontation, but something more complex, more measured. I didn't expect you tonight, he said as I reached the deck. Some conversations. Shouldn't wait, I replied, taking the seat across from him. Between us lay the spread of Morgan Hospitality documents, 8 years of my professional life carefully documented in annual reports, press releases, and industry analyses. He gestured to the materials. I've been educating myself about my wife. Turns out she's quite accomplished. And what have you learned? That Morgan Hospitality's sustainable luxury model has consistently outperformed traditional approaches for the past 5 years. That their CEO has been recognized for innovation 3 times by Hospitality Global. That their employee retention rate is 40% above industry average. He met my gaze directly. That I've been competing with and losing to my wife for years without knowing it. The setting sun cast long shadows across the deck as we sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 5 years of separate lives hanging between us. Why, Brooke? He finally asked, his voice stripped of the anger from yesterday, leaving only genuine confusion. Why maintain the deception for so long? It was the question I'd been asking myself since the revelation. The professional answers were clear, but the personal truth had remained elusive until this moment, sitting across from the man who had consistently failed to see me. Because you never looked, I said simply. From the day we met, you decided who I was based on your assumptions about women's capabilities. And the longer it continued, the more I realized that no achievement of mine would ever be enough to change how you saw me, or women in general. That's not fair, he protested. But weakly, isn't it? Last night you mocked the very innovations that have made my company successful. You dismissed the leadership capabilities of a woman you'd never met, who happened to be your wife. He flinched at the reminder. I said things I regret. But you meant them, Ian. That's the point. Those weren't slips of the tongue. They were your genuine beliefs about women in business, about what a wife should be. He was silent for a long moment, looking out at the ocean. So where does that leave us? Professionally and personally? I followed his gaze to the horizon, where the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and pink. That depends on whether you can accept who I actually am, not who you thought I was or wanted me to be. And if I can, then maybe we build something new. Not based on expectations or assumptions, but on reality, all of it, messy and complicated as it may be. As darkness settled over the beach house, we began the real conversation. Not as CEO and acquired executive, not as wife and husband with prescribed roles, but as two people seeing each other clearly for perhaps the first time. Whatever came next, at least it would be built on truth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.